The late 4th century. Imagine the sun rising, not over one Rome, but over an empire stretched thin, a giant weary from centuries of glory and war. This isn't the Rome of Caesar or Augustus, bristling with the confidence of conquest. This is a different Rome, an older Rome, one that has begun to look inward, to question itself. Our story begins in the east, in the magnificent city of Constantinople, the new Rome. As the first rays of dawn touch the golden mosaics of its grand churches and the marble of its sprawling palaces, a new era is dawning, though few can truly grasp its significance. The empire is officially split, administered by 2 emperors, one in the west, one in the east. It asks a practical solution to an impossible problem: how to govern a territory that stretches from the misty shores of Britain to the sun-scorched sands of Egypt. This division, meant to save the empire, has instead created a subtle rivalry, a growing distance between 2 halves of the same whole. They speak different primary languages: Latin in the west, Greek in the east. They face different enemies, different economic pressures, and different internal skills. The air isn't filled with the clash of swords, not yet, but with the quiet, persistent hum of change. And in this world of quiet dawns and growing shadows, a man named Theodosius is about to step onto the stage. He's a Spaniard, a soldier, a man of profound and unyielding faith. He inherits an empire teetering on the brink. Barbarian tribes, the Goths, are not just at the gates. They are through them, a powerful, disruptive force settled within the empire's own borders. The old gods of the Roman pantheon, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, are fading. Their temples still stand, but their worshippers are dwindling. A new faith, Christianity, once a persecuted sect, is now a powerful, empire-wide institution. But it's a faith riven by its own internal debates, fierce arguments over the very nature of God. This is the world of Theodosius. It's a world of gilded palaces and muddy frontier forts, of devout bishops and pagan philosophers, of Roman generals and Gothic cheat. It's a world where the old ways are dying and the new are struggling to be born. Theodosius doesn't just have to command armies. He has to navigate a labyrinth of theological disputes. He doesn't just have to manage an economy. He has to redefine what it even means to be Roman. When he is unexpectedly called to power, he inherits a crisis. The Easto-Roman army has been shattered at the Battle of Adrianople, a defeat so catastrophic that the emperor himself, Valens, was killed on the field. The Goths are running rampant through the Balkans, a wound in the very heartland of the Eastern Empire. Theodosius is not a man born to the purple. He is a man called by necessity. He must rebuild an army, pacify the Goths, and somehow hold this fragile world together. His methods will be controversial. His decisions making. He will negotiate with the barbarians in a way no emperor has before, not as vanquished enemies, but as allies living within the empire under their own leaders. This policy, born of desperation, will have consequences that echo for centuries, shaping the very makeup of the future European kingdoms. But the biggest battles Theodosius will fight won't be against the Goths. They will be battles of faith. He is a fervent Nicene Christian, and he sees the various heresies crisscrossing the empire, especially Arianism, not just as theological errors, but as threats to the stability and soul of his realm. He will use the full power of the state to enforce religious orthodoxy, issuing edicts that will marginalize and eventually outlaw the ancient pagan traditions. Think about that for a moment. Imagine a world where the temples that have stood for 1,000 years, the centers of civic and religious life, are ordered closed, where the sacred flame of Vesta in Rome, tended for centuries, is extinguished. This isn't just a change in policy. It's a spiritual revolution, a complete reordering of society. Theodosius will be the emperor who makes Christianity not just the favored religion, but the asterisk, only asterisk, state-sanctioned religion. He will clash with powerful bishops like Ambrose of Milan, a confrontation that will establish a new dynamic between church and state, one where even a Roman emperor must bow to the authority of a bishop. This moment, when Theodosius is forced to do public penance, is a watershed in Western history. It's a sign that a new power has risen, one that can challenge the absolute authority of the emperor himself. Through his reign, we see the blueprint of the medieval world being drawn. The fusion of Roman administrative tradition with Christian faith, the integration of Germanic peoples into the Roman world, and the growing power of the Church. Theodosius will be the last emperor to rule over a truly united Roman Empire. East and West, after his death, the final, permanent split will occur, and the two halves will drift apart toward their very different destinies. The West, towards collapse and transformation into a patchwork of barbarian kingdoms. The East, towards a millennium of survival as the Byzantine Empire. So, as we watch that quiet dawn break over Constantinople, we're not just seeing the start of a new day, we're witnessing the twilight of one world and the birth of another. The story of Theodosius is the story of this momentous transition. It's a story of faith, power, and the impossible choices that must be made when an old world is dying. It's the story of the last Roman and the first medieval king, all rolled into one. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this fascinating, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We have so much more to explore together. See you next time. Hello history lovers and welcome back to the channel. Last time, we talked about Constantine the Great, the man who legalized Christianity and moved the capital of the Roman Empire. It seemed like a new golden age was dawning. But what happens after a giant leaves the stage? Often, chaos. And that's exactly what followed Constantine's death. In 337 AD, Constantine had a plan for a smooth succession. He envisioned his 3 sons and a nephew ruling the empire together, a tetrarchy of his own blood. It was a nice idea, but it completely ignored human nature, especially the nature of ambitious princes. The moment Constantine was gone, the plan imploded. His sons, Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans, weren't interested in sharing. Almost immediately, a brutal purge of the imperial family began. Their cousins, their uncles, anyone who could potentially challenge their claim to the throne were systematically eliminated. It was a bloody and ruthless consolidation of power. With their potential rivals out of the way, the 3 brothers met to carve up the massive Roman Empire among themselves. Constantine, too, took the western provinces, Britain, Gaul, and Spain. Constans, the youngest, received Italy, Africa, and the central territories, and Constantius II, perhaps the most capable and certainly the most ruthless of the 3, took control of the vast and wealthy East, including the new capital, Constantinople. This division wasn't just administrative. It was the seed of a permanent split that would haunt the empire for the next century. The idea of a single, unified Rome was already starting to fade. You'd think with an empire each, they'd be content. You'd be wrong. Sibling rivalry on an imperial scale is a recipe for disaster. In 340 AD, just 3 years after their father's death, Constantine II decided his portion wasn't big enough. He marched his army from Gaul into Italy to attack his younger brother Constans. It was a disastrous miscalculation. Constance's forces ambushed and killed Constantine II, who's, like that 3 brothers, became 2. Constans absorbed his dead brother's territories, now ruling the entire western half of the empire, while Constantius II continued to govern the east. For a decade, an uneasy peace held between the 2 remaining brothers. Constans ruled the west, and Constantius II was busy in the east, primarily dealing with the persistent threat of the Sassanid Empire in Persia. This was a constant drain on Roman resources and manpower, a grinding back-and-forth conflict that never seemed to end. While Constantius was occupied, Constance's rule in the west grew increasingly unpopular. He was seen as corrupt and cruel, and he alienated the military, which is never a smart move for a Roman emperor. In 350 AD, the other shoe dropped. A high-ranking general named Magnentius, fed up with Constans, declared himself emperor. The legions in Gaul rallied to his side. Constans, abandoned by his own troops, tried to flee but was hunted down and killed in the Pyrenees. Now, a usurper controlled the west, and Constantius II in the east had a choice: accept this new reality or avenge his brother and reunite the empire under his sole rule. Knowing Constantius, it wasn't much of a choice. The civil war that followed was one of the bloodiest in Roman history. Constantius II marched his veteran eastern legions west to confront Magna. The decisive clash came at the Battle of Mursa in 351 AD, in modern-day Croatia. It was a horrific slaughter. Tens of thousands of elite Roman soldiers died, not fighting foreign enemies, but killing each other. The sources say over 50,000 men were lost in a single day. Although Constantius was victorious, the battle was a catastrophic blow to the empire's military strength. It was a Pyrrhic victory that left the frontiers dangerously weakened for years to come. After 2 more years of fighting, Magnentius, cornered and defeated, took his own life. By 353 AD, 26 years after his father's death, Constantius II had finally achieved what his father had intended. A single Roman empire ruled by a single emperor. He had eliminated his brothers and the usurpers. He stood alone, the sole master of the Roman world. But the cost had been immense. The empire was exhausted, its armies depleted, and the unity he had forged through bloodshed was fragile at best. While all this political drama was unfolding, a massive social and cultural shift was happening in the background. Remember, Constantine had legalized Christianity, but that didn't mean the empire became Christian overnight. In the mid-4th century, paganism was still very much alive and well. The old gods Jupiter, Mars, Minerva still worshipped in temples across the empire. The Senate in Rome was a bastion of traditional pagan aristocracy. It was a time of religious coexistence, but also of growing tension. Christianity itself wasn't a unified bloc either. The Arian controversy, which we touched on in our last video, was tearing the church apart. This was a major theological dispute about the nature of Christ. Was he of the same substance as God the Father, or a lesser, created being? Constantius II was a staunch supporter of the Arian position, and he used his imperial power to try and force it upon the church. He deposed bishops who supported the Nicene Creed, like the famous Athanasius of Alexandria, and installed Arian-friendly leaders. This created deep divisions and resentment within the Christian community itself. So you had pagans, Nicentians, and Arian Christians, all vying for influence. So, let's take a step back. What did the Roman Empire look like around 368? On the surface, it was unified under one emperor, Constantius II. But underneath, it was a fractured, exhausted state. The civil wars had bled the legions dry, leaving the Rhine and Danube frontiers vulnerable to barbarian incursions. The treasury was empty from decades of constant warfare. The dream of a unified Christian empire was stalled by bitter internal theological disputes. The grand vision of Constantine was fading, replaced by a much harsher reality. The empire had survived, but it was scarred, weakened, and heading towards even greater challenges. And that's where we'll pick up next time, with the arrival of one of Rome's most fascinating and controversial emperors, Julian the Apostate. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the chaotic aftermath of Constantine's reign, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. Let us know in the comments what you think about this turbulent period. We'll see you next time. Far from the glittering heart of the Roman Empire, in the sun-drenched lands of Hispania, modern-day Spain, a boy was born who would one day hold the fate of that very empire in his hands. This is the story of Theodosius, a man whose journey from the quiet provinces to the imperial throne would change the course of history. Imagine the year 347 AD. The Roman world is vast, a sprawling tapestry of cultures, languages, and beliefs, held together by the might of its legions and the rule of law. In a town in what is now Coca, Spain, a child named Flavius Theodosius enters the world. This wasn't just any family. This was a military household, steeped in the traditions of service and command. His father, known to history as Theodosius the Elder, was a figure of immense respect. He wasn't a senator from Rome's ancient families, but a highly capable and successful general. Think of him as the ultimate career soldier, a man who had earned his rank through skill on the battlefield and unwavering loyalty to the emperor. For young Theodosius, his father wasn't just a parent. He was a living embodiment of Roman virtue, discipline, duty, and courage. Growing up in Hispania was a world away from the political intrigue and chaotic power struggles of Rome or Constantinople. Life was more structured, more predictable. The rhythm of the seasons, the management of their family estates, and the ever-present influence of military life would have been the backdrop of his childhood. This environment didn't breed softness or indulgence. Instead, it instilled in him a deep-seated sense of order and responsibility. He learned to ride horses, not just for pleasure, but with the precision of a cavalryman. He studied tactics and strategy not as abstract concepts, but as the family business. While other boys from wealthy families might have been focused on rhetoric and philosophy in the grand schools of Athens or Rome, Theodosius's education was intensely practical. He learned about logistics, about leading men, and about the geography of the empire's vast frontiers. It was an apprenticeship in command, taught at his father's side. The lessons he absorbed weren't just from books, but from watching a seasoned general make decisions that held the lives of thousands in the balance. This provincial upbringing forged a unique character. He had the pride of a Roman aristocrat, but it was tempered with the pragmatism of a soldier. He understood the value of a well-organized supply line as much as he understood the importance of a powerful speech. This quiet, disciplined life in the Spanish countryside was the crucible that shaped the man. He was developing a strong will, a sharp mind, and a sense of gravity that would later be essential for a ruler. As Theodosius reached manhood, it was only natural that he would follow in his father's footsteps. The military was his birthright and his calling. He joined the army, not as a raw recruit, but as the promising son of a famous general, serving under his father's command in campaigns across the empire. His first real test came in Britannia, the empire's remote and often rebellious northern frontier. Imagine the scene: the misty, green hills of Britain, a far cry from the sunny plains of Hispania. Here Theodosius fought alongside his father to quell uprisings and restore Roman order. He wasn't just an observer, he was an active participant, learning the brutal realities of warfare firsthand. He saw how loyalty was earned, how victories were won, and how costly defeats could be. These experiences in Britain, and later in other parts of the empire, were his true university. They solidified his reputation as a competent and reliable officer. He wasn't just Theodosius the elder's son anymore. He was earning his own name. He was proving himself to be a man of action, a leader who could be trusted. His father's influence opened doors, but it was his own ability that kept him open. He was disciplined, intelligent, and possessed a natural authority that made men want to follow him. This period of military service was crucial. It connected him with the army, the ultimate power broker in the late Roman Empire. The soldiers saw in him a reflection of his respected father, but also a commander in his own right. But the winds of fate are often unpredictable and cruel. Just as Theodosius's career was on the rise, disaster struck. His father, the great general Theodosius the Elder, fell victim to the deadly court politics of Emperor Valentinian I after a highly successful campaign in Africa. He was arrested and, in 376 executed on trumped-up charges. The exact reasons are lost to history, shrouded in the murky world of imperial jealousy and intrigue. One moment, his father was a celebrated hero of the empire. The next, he was a condemned traitor. For Theodosius, this was a devastating blow. His mentor, his hero, his father, was gone, disgraced, and executed by the very state they had served so faithfully. In the treacherous world of Roman politics, the fall of a great man often meant the destruction of his entire family. Theodosius was in mortal danger. Wisely, he understood that to remain in the public eye or near the court was to invite a similar fate. He did the only thing he could. He retreated. He withdrew from military life, from the world of ambition and power, and returned to his family estates in Hispania. He effectively went into a self-imposed exile. He traded his sword and armor for the life of a country gentleman. This period must have been one of profound grief, fear, and uncertainty. He had lost his father and his career, and his own life hung by a thread. He was living quietly, managing his lands, trying to become invisible to the powerful and paranoid men who ruled the empire. To the outside world, it must have seemed like the story of the Theodosian family was over. The brilliant general was dead, and his promising son had vanished into provincial obscurity. He was seemingly content to live out his days as a wealthy landowner, far from the dangers of imperial service. But this retreat was not an end. It was a pause, a moment of quiet reflection before the storm. In the solitude of his Spanish estate, Theodosius was waiting, though he may not have known what he was waiting for. Meanwhile, the Roman Empire was hurtling towards one of the greatest military disasters in its history. The Goths, a powerful Germanic people, had crossed the Danube frontier and were now rampaging through the Balkan provinces. The Eastern Roman Emperor Valens decided to confront them. Hayden, he was confident, perhaps overconfident, and he marched his army to a place near the city of Adrianople on a hot August day in 378 AD. The Roman legions, the pride of the empire, met the Gothic cavalry. The result was not just a defeat, it was an annihilation. The Roman army was shattered, and Emperor Valens himself was killed in the fighting. His body never recovered. The Battle of Adrianople was a cataclysm. It exposed the empire's vulnerability in a way that hadn't been seen for centuries. The Eastern Empire was now without an emperor and without an army, and a victorious Gothic force was loose within its borders. Panic gripped Constantinople. The Western Emperor Gratian was young and overwhelmed. He knew he couldn't handle the crisis alone, and needed a coempora for the East, but not just any politician or courtier. He needed a soldier, a brilliant, experienced military commander who could rally the broken armies, confront the Gothic threat, and restore order from chaos. But who? The best generals were either dead at Adrianople or untrustworthy. Gratian needed someone with a proven military record, someone who commanded respect, and someone who wasn't tainted by the recent political turmoil. And then he remembered the man living in quiet exile in Spain, the son of the great Theodosius the Elder. A man who had already proven his worth on the battlefield but had been cast aside by politics. And so, the call came. Imperial messengers galloped across the empire, carrying a summons that would once again change Theodosius's life. He was being called back from obscurity, summoned from his quiet country life to the center of the storm. The very empire that had executed his father was now begging for his help. It was an incredible twist of fate. In 379 AD, Gratian made his decision. He officially appointed Theodosius as the new Augustus, the co-emperor. For the Eastern Roman Empire, at the age of just 32, the man who had been living in fear for his life was now elevated to the pinnacle of power. He was no longer Theodosius, the provincial landowner. He was Emperor Theodosius. His quiet life was over. Before him lay the monumental task of saving a shattered empire from the brink of collapse. His discipline, his military training, his entire life had been a preparation for this moment. The boy from Hispania was now tasked with defending civilization itself. Thank you so much for watching. The story of Theodosius is a powerful reminder of how fate can turn on a dime. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more epic stories from history. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. See you next time. Have you ever wondered what forges an emperor? Is it bloodline? A lust for power? Or is it something harder? Something earned in the mud and blood of a forgotten frontier? Today, we're not talking about the man on the throne, but the boy in the legion. This is the story of how a young man named Theodosius learned warfare, loyalty, and faith, shaping him into the last great ruler of a unified Roman Empire. Our story begins not in the gilded halls of Constantinople or Rome, but on the rugged, unforgiving borders of the empire. Imagine the late 4th century. Rome is a giant, but a giant beset by enemies on all sides, on the Rhine, the Danube, in Britain. Frontiers are a constant swirl of skirmishes, raids, and full-blown wars. This is the world that a young Theodosius, son of the brilliant general Theodosius the Elder, is born into. His classroom wasn't a library, it was a military camp. His textbooks were not scrolls of philosophy, but the faces of hardened veterans and the glint of enemy steel. From his earliest years, Theodosius was at his father's side. Think of it as the ultimate apprenticeship. He wasn't just observing, he was living the life of a soldier. He learned how to march 4 miles under a punishing sun, his armor chafing, his feet bleeding. He learned the discipline of the camp, the rigid hierarchy, the instant obedience required when a trumpet blared. He ate the same coarse bread and sour wine as the common legionary. This wasn't just about toughening him up. It was about teaching him the single most important lesson for any future commander: empathy. He understood the men he would one day lead because he had been one of them. He knew their fears, their hopes, their breaking points. His father, Theodosius the Elder, was a master of the Roman art of war. He was a brilliant strategist and a stern disciplinarian, serving under the formidable Emperor Valentinian I. Valentinian himself was a soldier's soldier, a man who had risen from the ranks and respected only strength and competence. This was the environment that shaped young Theodosius. He saw firsthand how his father commanded respect, not just through fear, but through shared hardship and undeniable success on the battlefield. One of their most significant campaigns was in Britain. The province was in chaos, overrun by a coalition of Picts, Scots, and Saxons. In what was known as the Great Conspiracy, the situation was dire. Roman authority had collapsed. Theodosius the Elder was dispatched to restore order, and his son was with him. Imagine a young Theodosius sailing to this misty, rebellious island at the very edge of the known world. He would have witnessed his father's methodical genius. First, they secured London, the provincial capital. Then, they painstakingly pushed back the invaders, not with one single, glorious battle, but through a grinding campaign of patrols, ambushes, and fortified positions. Here Theodosius learned that warfare wasn't just about charging the enemy. It was about logistics, ensuring the troops were fed, supplied, and paid. It was about intelligence, knowing the enemy's movements and intentions. And it was about morale, keeping the spirits of the men high during a long, difficult campaign far from home. He saw how his father dealt with deserters and traitors, but also how he rewarded bravery and loyalty. These were lessons you couldn't learn from a book. They were etched into his memory by the cold British rain and the smoke of burning barbarian villages. After their success in Britain, they were sent to the Rhine frontier to face the Alemanni, a fierce Germanic confederation. Here, the warfare was different. It was a war of lightning raids and brutal, close-quarters combat in dense forests. Theodosius learned to adapt, to fight a different kind of enemy in a different kind of terrain. He was no longer just an observer. By this time, he was likely holding a junior command of his own. He would have been responsible for a small unit of men, his first taste of real leadership. The lives of those soldiers depended on his decisions. A wrong move, a moment of hesitation, could mean disaster. This is where the art of command is truly learned in the crucible of personal responsibility. Amidst all this, another crucial element was being forged: his faith. The 4th century was a time of intense religious ferment. The Roman Empire was officially Christian, but the faith itself was divided by fierce debates, most notably the Arian controversy. Theodosius was raised in a family that adhered to the Nicene Creed, the orthodox belief in the Trinity. On the frontier, faith was not an abstract theological concept. It was a source of strength and community. In the face of constant danger and death, belief in a higher purpose and divine justice in an afterlife was a powerful motivator. For a soldier, faith provided a moral compass in a world of violence. For a commander, it was a tool to inspire and unite his men. The shared rituals, the prayers before battle, the comfort of a field chaplain, all of this bound the army together. This deep-seated Nicene faith would become a defining feature of his later reign. So, we have a young man shaped by 3 powerful forces. From his father and Emperor Valentinian, he learned the brutal, practical art of Roman warfare. From living alongside the common soldier, he learned loyalty and the true meaning of leadership. And from the turbulent spiritual world of the late empire, he forged a faith that would guide his actions for the rest of his life. He was becoming the complete package: a tough, experienced soldier, a capable commander, and a devout Christian. But the world of Roman high command was as treacherous as any barbarian frontier. His father's stunning success attracted jealousy. In 376, after the death of Emperor Valens, court intrigues led to the unthinkable. Theodosius the Elder, the hero of Britain and the Rhine, was arrested and executed on false charges. Suddenly, the world of young Theodosius shattered. His mentor, his father, was gone, a victim of the very system he had served so loyally. At risk himself, Theodosius was forced to retreat from the military and retire to his family estates in Spain. This could have been the end of his story, a promising career cut short by political treachery. Many men would have been broken by such a blow, filled with bitterness and a desire for revenge. But this period of forced retirement was perhaps the most important part of his training. It taught him a lesson that the battlefield could not. Patience. It gave him time to reflect on everything he had learned, to digest the harsh realities of power, loyalty, and betrayal. He had seen the best of the Roman military machine in its darkest, most self-destructive side. He didn't know it then, but his time in the wilderness was temporary. The Roman Empire was about to face its greatest military catastrophe in centuries, a disaster so profound it would shake the foundations of the world. And in its moment of darkest need, the empire would look for a savior. It would look for a man with unmatched military experience, a man who understood the frontier, a man who knew how to lead. It would look for a soldier, and from his estates in Spain, Theodosius would be called to answer. His training was over. His destiny was about to begin. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. The story of Theodosius is a powerful reminder that leaders are often forged in the most unexpected and difficult of circumstances. If you enjoyed this and want to see what happens next, please hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in our series. Let me know in the comments what part of his training you found most fascinating. Until next time, stay curious. Friends, history buffs, welcome back. Imagine this. The year is 378 CE. The mighty Roman Empire, the superpower of the ancient world, is teetering on the brink of collapse. In the east, a storm has gathered, a storm of iron, fury, and desperation. This isn't just another battle. This is a cataclysm, a turning point that will echo through the centuries. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most disastrous days in Roman history, the Battle of Adrianople. So, let's set the scene. The Goths, a collection of Germanic peoples, are not just distant barbarians at the gate. For years, they've been pushed from their homelands by the terrifying advance of the Huns from the steppes of Central Asia. Desperate, a large group of Goths, led by a chieftain named Fritigorn, arrives at the Danube River, the northern frontier of the Eastern Roman Empire. They don't come to conquer. Not initially. They come as refugees, begging for asylum, for land, and for a chance to live under the protection of the Roman eagle. The Eastern Emperor Valens sees an opportunity. These Goths are fierce warriors. He could settle them within the empire, give them land, and in return, they would serve in his armies, bolstering Rome's military might. It sounds like a win-win, right? Well, the road to disaster is often paved with good intentions, or in this case, a catastrophic mix of good intentions and terrible execution. The Roman officials tasked with managing the Gothic settlement were corrupt and cruel. They exploited the refugees mercilessly. They withheld promised food supplies, forcing the starving Goths to sell their own children into servitude for scraps of dog meat. It was a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions, fueled by Roman greed. Fritigorn and his people were pushed to the edge. The respect they had for the empire curdled into resentment, then into open rebellion. The refugees had become enemies, and they began to raid and plunder the wealthy Roman province of Thrace. Emperor Valens, who had been campaigning in the east against the Sassanid Empire, is furious. He sees this not just as a rebellion, but as a personal insult. He rushes back to Constantinople, gathering his legions. He's determined to crush this Gothic uprising and make an example of Fritigorn. His nephew, the Western Emperor Gratian, is marching to his aid with reinforcements. But Valens is an ambitious and somewhat insecure ruler. He wants the glory of this victory for himself. He doesn't want to share it with his young, successful nephew. This brings us to August 9th, 378. A sweltering summer day near the city of Adrianople in modern-day Turkey. Valens scouts report that the Gothic force is smaller than expected. Perhaps only 10,000 men. It's a tempting target. Fritigorn, a cunning strategist, sends envoys to Valens, seemingly to negotiate for peace, but it's a delaying tactic. He's waiting for his own secret weapon, his powerful cavalry, which is away foraging. Pride and impatience get the better of Valens. He ignores the advice of his more cautious generals who urge him to wait for Gratian's army. He wants to attack, now. He orders his legions to march. Under the blazing midday sun, his men, clad in heavy armor, march for 8 miles without adequate food or water. They arrive at the Gothic camp exhausted, dehydrated, and disorganized. The Goths had formed a wagon laager, a defensive circle of their wagons, creating a makeshift fortress. Their families were inside. They were fighting not just for plunder, but for their very survival. As the tired Roman legions struggle to form their battle lines, the battle begins in a chaotic, piecemeal fashion. The Roman left-wing charges, even reaching the wagon circle, but without proper support. They are repulsed, and then, at the critical moment, the ground begins to shake. Thundering over the horizon comes Fritigern's Gothic cavalry, returning just in the nick of time. They don't just hit the Roman flank, they crash into it like a tidal wave. They smash through the Roman cavalry, which is already in disarray, and then sweep around to slam into the rear of the Roman infantry. The Roman legions, the pride of the ancient world, are now completely surrounded. The heat, the thirst, the exhaustion, and now, the terror. It's a death trap. The legionaries are packed so tightly they uneven lift their arms, to swing their swords, or effectively use their shields. They are being compressed, suffocated, and slaughtered. Contemporary historian Ammianus Marcellinus, who gives us the most vivid account, describes a scene of absolute horror. Men slipping on blood, bodies piling up, the air thick with the screams of the dying. The Romans fight with the courage of despair, but the situation is hopeless. 2/3 of the Eastern Field Army is annihilated. 35 high-ranking tribunes and generals are killed. It's a bloodbath on a scale not seen since the Battle of Cannae over 500 years earlier. And what of the emperor? What happened to Valens? His fate is shrouded in mystery. One account says he was struck by an arrow and died on the field, his body lost among the heaps of the slain, never to be given a proper burial. Another, more dramatic tale tells of him being wounded and carried by his bodyguards to a nearby farmhouse. The Goths, unaware the emperor was inside, surrounded the house and, when met with resistance, set it ablaze, burning Valens alive. Either way, the emperor of the East was gone. The supreme commander, the living embodiment of Roman authority, had been wiped off the face of the earth by the very people he had allowed into his empire. The news of Adrianople sends a shockwave across the Roman world. It's not just a military defeat, it's a psychological catastrophe. The invincible Roman legions have been crushed. The emperor is dead. The Eastern Empire is leaderless, its army shattered, and a victorious, enraged Gothic army is now roaming freely through the heartlands of the Balkans, looting and burning at will. The gates of Constantinople itself are threatened. The empire is in a state of absolute crisis. Who could possibly save them now? The Western Emperor Gratian is too young and too far away to manage this disaster alone. They need a leader, a brilliant general, a steady hand to calm the panic and rebuild the broken legions. The court officials in Constantinople cast their minds back. They remembered a man, a talented general, the son of a famous commander, who had been forced into early retirement and was living quietly on his family estates in Spain. His name was Theodosius. A few years prior, his father, a highly respected general, had been executed on trumped-up charges amidst the brutal power politics of the imperial court. Theodosius, disgusted and likely fearing for his own life, had stepped away from the military and public life. He had traded his sword for a plowshare. But the empire was now desperate. They needed his experience, his skill, and his reputation. And so the summons went out, the call to come back from retirement, to leave the peace of his Spanish villa, and to take on a task that seemed impossible: to save a broken empire from the brink of total annihilation. Gratian elevates him, making him the new emperor of the East. Theodosius, at the age of 32, accepts the poisoned chalice. He is now Emperor Theodosius I. His task is monumental. He doesn't have an army to command. He can't risk another pitched battle against the triumphant Goths. So, he embarks on a completely different strategy. It's a slow, grueling process of guerrilla warfare, of small-scale skirmishes, of rebuilding the army recruit by recruit, often by incorporating barbarian mercenaries, including Goths themselves. He uses diplomacy, bribery, and political maneuvering to divide the Gothic leaders against each other. Slowly, painstakingly, over the next 4 years, Theodosius manages to stabilize the situation. He can't defeat the Goths militarily, so he does the next best thing. He pacifies them. In 382 CE, he signs a treaty that is radically different from any before. He allows the Goths to settle within the empire, not as subjugated peoples, but as a semi-independent, allied nation under their own leaders. They would fight for Rome, but as a federated bloc, not as integrated Roman soldiers. This was a seismic shift. For the first time, a large, cohesive barbarian group was allowed to exist as a state within the state. While it solved the immediate crisis, it set a dangerous precedent that would ultimately contribute to the fragmentation and eventual fall of the Western Roman Empire in the following century. Theodosius saved the East, but the solution he implemented fundamentally changed the very nature of the Roman Empire forever. The crises that began with starving refugees at the Danube and exploded in the fiery catastrophe of Adrianople was a brutal lesson for Rome. It showed the limits of Roman power and the devastating consequences of corruption and arrogance. And it brought forth from a quiet retirement the man who would become known as Theodosius the Great, the last emperor to rule over a united Roman Empire, whose reign would mark the beginning of the final chapter for the ancient world. What an incredible story of disaster, desperation, and a comeback against all odds. It really shows how a single day can alter the course of history. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into history, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure. Let me know in the comments, what do you think was Valen's biggest mistake? Until next time, stay curious. In the biting winter of 379, the Roman Empire was bleeding. From the misty frontiers of Britannia to the sun-scorched sands of Syria, a shadow of uncertainty stretched long and deep. The catastrophic battle of Adrianople the previous year had not just claimed the life of an emperor, Valens, but had shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. 2/3 of the Eastern army lay dead on the Thracian plains, a generation of soldiers lost in a single afternoon. The Goths, once petitioners at the empire's gate, were now a ravenous horde deep within its heartlands, pillaging and burning their way through the Balkans. The situation was desperate, a crisis that threatened to unravel 1,000 years of Roman history. Who could possibly step into this vortex of chaos and steer the ship of state away from the rocks? The Western emperor, a young man named Gratian, was overwhelmed. He was a capable administrator and a decent general, but he was barely in his 20s. The sheer scale of the disaster in the East was too much for one man to handle. He needed a partner, a co-emperor, someone with the steel and the skill to confront the Gothic menace and rebuild the shattered East. But who? The Roman aristocracy was filled with ambitious men, but many were untested, more skilled in courtroom rhetoric than battlefield command. Gratian needed a soldier, a proven leader, someone who understood the brutal realities of the frontier. His search led him not to the gilded palaces of Rome or the bustling forums of Constantinople, but to a quiet country estate in Hispania. There, living in self-imposed exile, was a man named Flavius Theodosius. Theodosius was no stranger to power or to war. He was the son of one of the empire's most celebrated generals, Theodosius the Elder. He had grown up in military camps. The clang of steel, and the call of the legionary trumpets, the soundtrack to his youth. He had served with distinction under his father, fighting in Britain, along the Rhine, and in Africa. He had risen through the ranks, earning the title of Dux Massi, a military commander responsible for a key section of the Danube frontier. He knew the Goths. He had fought them, negotiated with them, and understood their strengths and their weaknesses. He was tough, pragmatic, and respected by the soldiers. But his career had come to a shocking halt, following a web of court intrigue. His illustrious father had been unjustly executed. Disgusted and disillusioned, Theodosius had withdrawn from public life, trading his general's baton for the quiet life of a provincial landowner. He had put the world of politics and war behind him. Or so he thought. The summons from Gratian must have felt like a thunderbolt. The message was simple and stark. The empire needed him. The very existence of the Roman East was at stake. For Theodosius, this was a moment of profound personal conflict. To accept meant returning to the treacherous world that had destroyed his father. It meant leaving the safety of his family and his estate to face an almost unwinnable war. It meant embracing a destiny he had purposefully shunned. Yet, to refuse was unthinkable. The call of duty. The concept of asterisk. Romanitus Asterix, there was only one choice to make. He packed his bags, said farewell to his life of quiet retirement, and journeyed east. He met Gratian not in Rome or Milan, but in Sirmium, a strategic military city on the frontier. There, on January 19th, 379, the transfer of power took place. Imagine the scene. A stark, military setting. Far from the pomp and ceremony of the old capitals, the air is cold, filled with the nervous energy of soldiers and officials. Gratian, the young Augustus of the West, formally bestows the title of Augustus of the East upon Theodosius. There are no grand speeches for the history books, no ostentatious displays. This is a business transaction born of desperation. Gratian hands over the provinces of Dacia and Macedonia, along with the monumental task of dealing with the Gothic crises. He was effectively giving Theodosius a poisoned chalice, a shattered army, an empty treasury, and an enemy running rampant across his new domain. From Sirmium, Theodosius traveled to This Greek port city would become his temporary capital, a forward base from which to direct the war effort. It was here, in the imperial palace of Thessalonica, that the true weight of his new role must have settled upon him. Picture him in a quiet room, perhaps late at night, the sounds of the military camp filtering in from outside. The purple robe, the symbol of imperial power, feels heavy on his shoulders. He is no longer just a general. He is the sacred person of the emperor, a ruler chosen by God, responsible for the lives of millions. Here, away from the public gaze, he would have made a quiet oath, not just to Gratian, but to himself, to his ancestors, and to the idea of Rome itself. An oath to restore order, to push back the tide of chaos, and to rebuild what had been broken. It was a moment of immense solitude and staggering responsibility. The retired country gentleman was gone forever. In his place stood Theodosius, Augustus, the man who would become known to history as the Great. His first actions were not dramatic charges into battle. That would have been suicidal. The Eastern army had to be rebuilt from scratch. Theodosius was a pragmatist. He began a slow, grueling process of recruitment and training. He avoided major pitched battles with the main Gothic force, knowing he couldn't win. Instead, he employed guerrilla tactics, launching small-scale raids, cutting off supply lines, and targeting splinter groups. He focused on restoring discipline and morale among his new troops, many of whom were raw recruits or barbarian mercenaries. It was a painstaking, unglamorous process. He also initiated a clever diplomatic strategy, seeking to exploit divisions within the Gothic leadership. He knew that the Goths were not a monolithic entity, but a collection of rival chieftains and factions. He offered land, gold, and titles to those who would switch their allegiance and fight for the empire. This was a controversial policy. To many traditional Romans, the idea of recruiting the very barbarians who had destroyed a Roman army was abhorrent. They saw it as a dilution of Roman strength, a sign of weakness. But Theodosius saw it as a necessity. The empire simply lacked the native-born manpower to replenish its legions After the disaster of Adrianople, he needed soldiers, and he was willing to find them wherever he could. This policy of integrating barbarian groups into the army as foederati or federated allies would have profound consequences for the future of the Roman Empire, shaping its military and social fabric for the next century. It was a gamble, born of desperation, but it was a gamble that began to pay off. Slowly, painstakingly, Theodosius began to stabilize the situation. The Gothic advance was slowed, then halted. Pockets of resistance were contained. A semblance of Roman authority was re-established in the ravaged Balkan provinces. The man who had been called from retirement was proving his worth. He wasn't a flamboyant conqueror like Trajan or a tireless reformer like Diocletian. He was a crisis manager. A survivor, his ascension was not a moment of glorious triumph, but a somber assumption of duty in the empire's darkest hour. The quiet oath he took in the palace of Thessalonica was not just the beginning of his reign. It was a promise to pull the Roman world back from the brink of collapse. He had accepted the weight of a broken empire, and with a blend of military grit, political cunning, and controversial pragmatism, he began the long, arduous task of putting it back together. The road ahead was fraught with peril, rebellion, and religious controversy. But in that winter of 379, a new and powerful force had stepped onto the stage of history, one that would fundamentally reshape the destiny of the Roman Empire. Thank you so much for watching. We've only just begun to explore the fascinating reign of Theodosius the Great. If you found this story compelling, please hit that like button, and consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter in this epic saga. Your support helps us continue to bring these incredible stories from history to life. We'll see you in the next video. Friends, history buffs, fellow lovers of a good comeback story, welcome back to our channel. Today, we redive in deep into the story of an emperor who inherited a disaster and forged a legacy of stability from the ashes. We're talking about Theodosius the Great and his monumental task of rebuilding the Eastern Roman Empire. Picture this. It's the year 379 AD. The Eastern Roman Empire is reeling. The catastrophic Battle of Adrianople just happened, where Emperor Valens and the cream of the Roman army were wiped out by the Goths. The Balkans are overrun. Morale is at an all-time low, and the very survival of the East is in question. The new Western Emperor, Gratian, is young and overwhelmed. He needs a partner, someone with a steel spine and a sharp mind. He finds that man in a retired general living quietly on his estate in Spain. Flavius Theodosius. When Theodosius was proclaimed Augustus of the East, he didn't inherit a throne. He inherited a crisis. The army was shattered, not just in numbers, but in spirit. The treasury was strained, and a victorious, emboldened Gothic army was roaming freely through Roman territory. A lesser man would have panicked, launching desperate, ill-advised campaigns. But Theodosius was not a lesser man. His defining characteristic was a calm, almost unnerving patience, coupled with decisive action when the moment was right. His first priority was the army. He knew he couldn't magically replace the tens of thousands of veterans lost at Adrianople. So he got creative and pragmatic. He established his headquarters in Thessalonica, closer to the action. From there, he began a painstaking process of recruitment. He drew soldiers from all over the empire, but he also did something controversial. He started incorporating non-Roman peoples, often called barbarians, into the army on a massive scale. Franks, Alans, and yes, even Goths, were recruited, not just as auxiliary troops, but as regular soldiers and even officers. This was a risky move, but a necessary one. He was essentially rebuilding the military machine piece by piece, focusing on discipline and training to integrate these new forces. While rebuilding the army, Theodosius played a brilliant game of diplomacy and strategic patience with the Goths. He avoided large-scale decisive battles. He knew he couldn't win one yet. Instead, his generals engaged in skirmishes, raids, and guerrilla warfare. They wore the Goths down, disrupted their supply lines, and prevented them from uniting into a single, overwhelming force. It was a war of attrition, designed to exhaust the enemy and buy himself precious time. He was demonstrating that while Rome might have been wounded, it was far from defeated. Every small victory, every successful defense of a town, was a signal to his people and his enemies that order was being restored. This calm, methodical approach began to work wonders on Roman morale. The people of the East, who had lived in terror since Adrianople, started to see a glimmer of hope. Here was an emperor who wasn't rash, who wasn't throwing away lives in vain gambles. He was a steady hand on the tiller in a violent storm. His presence in the Balkans, sharing the risks with his soldiers, showed a commitment that won him immense loyalty. The troops, a mix of old Roman stock and new barbarian recruits, began to trust his judgment. They saw that his strategies, while not always glorious, were effective. They were surviving, and they were slowly, surely, pushing back. Theodosius's leadership was a masterclass in crisis management. He understood that you couldn't just fight a military war. You had to win the psychological one as well. By projecting an aura of unshakable confidence and calm, he made others believe. He wasn't just rebuilding an army. He was restoring faith in the Roman state itself. Then came the masterstroke. After 4 long years of this grueling, patient strategy, the Goths were exhausted. They were tired of constant warfare with no decisive victory. They were ready to talk. In 382 AD, Theodosius negotiated a treaty that was both groundbreaking and controversial. Instead of defeating the Goths and scattering them, he allowed them to settle within the empire, south of the Danube, as a distinct people under their own leaders. They were designated as Foederati. Or allies, bound to fight for Rome when called upon, in exchange for land and annual subsidies. To many traditional Romans, this was unthinkable, settling a massive, armed barbarian nation inside the borders. It seemed like letting the fox guard the henhouse. But Theodosius saw the bigger picture. He didn't have the manpower to evict them or the resources to continue the war indefinitely. This treaty turned a destructive enemy into a vital source of military manpower for the empire. It was a pragmatic solution to an impossible problem. It ended the devastating war, pacified the Balkans, and allowed the region to begin its recovery. The success of this Gothic settlement, however precarious, cemented Theodosius's reputation. He had taken a situation on the brink of collapse and, through a combination of military rebuilding, patient strategy, and audacious diplomacy, had stabilized the entire Eastern Empire. He had faced the storm and had not flinched. His calm, yet decisive leadership had not only saved the East, but had also laid the groundwork for its future, turning a moment of existential crisis into a new, if complex, chapter for Rome. This wasn't just about winning a war. It was about redefining what it meant to be Roman in a changing world. Theodosius proved that strength wasn't just about legions on a battlefield. It was about resilience, adaptability, and the quiet confidence to play the long game. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back in time. Theodosius's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most effective leadership is the most patient. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next historical adventure. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Hello and welcome back to our journey through history. Today, we're diving into a pivotal moment when the Roman Empire underwent a profound transformation, not just in its politics or its borders, but in its very soul. We'll be talking about the reign of Emperor Theodosius the Great and the definitive rise of Christianity as the state religion. This isn't just a story about decrees and doctrine. It's about how an emperor's personal faith reshaped the future of Western civilization. Before Theodosius, the Roman Empire's relationship with Christianity was a roller coaster. From brutal persecutions under emperors like Nero and Diocletian to Constantine's groundbreaking Edict of Milan, which granted tolerance, the faith's status was always precarious. Even after Constantine, emperors swung back and forth. Some, like his son Constantius II, favored Arianism, a competing Christian belief. Others, like Julian the Apostate, famously tried to revive the old pagan gods. The religious landscape of the late 4th century was a complex, often chaotic, tapestry of different Christian factions, lingering pagan traditions, and philosophical schools. The big question was, Which version of Christianity, if any, would ultimately prevail? Enter Flavius Theodosius, born in Hispania, modern-day Spain, in 347. Theodosius was a military man, the son of a successful general. He was known for his competence, his sense of duty, and, most importantly, his deeply held personal faith. Unlike many of his predecessors who dabbled in various Christian interpretations or used religion purely for political gain, Theodosius was a staunch and devout follower of the Nicene Creed. So, what exactly was the Nicene Creed? To understand Theodosius, we have to understand this crucial document. Back in 325, Emperor Constantine had convened the Council of Nicaea to settle a major theological dispute. The debates centered on the nature of Jesus Christ. A priest named Arius taught that Jesus, the Son, was a created being, subordinate to God the Father. This view, known as Arianism, was incredibly popular and spread widely. On the other side were those, led by figures like Athanasius of Alexandria, who argued that the Son was of the same substance as the Pater Coit. This is the core of Trinitarian doctrine. The Council of Nicaea sided with Athanasius, producing the Nicene Creed as the official statement of Orthodox belief. However, winning the debate didn't mean the argument was over. For the next 50 years, Arianism continued to thrive, even gaining the support of several emperors. The soul of Christianity was still up for grabs. When Theodosius came to power in the Eastern Roman Empire in 379, the situation was dire. The Goths had inflicted a catastrophic defeat on the Roman army at the Battle of Adrianople, and the empire was teetering on the brink of collapse. Theodosius, a skilled general and diplomat, managed to stabilize the military situation. But he saw that true unity required more than just strong borders. It required a unified spiritual identity. For him, that identity was unequivocally Nicene Christianity. One of his very first acts as emperor, even before he entered Constantinople, was to issue a landmark decree in 380, known as the Edict of Thessalonica. It was co-issued with the Western emperors, but Theodosius was the driving force. The language of the edict was clear and uncompromising. It commanded all Roman citizens to adhere to the faith, which was transmitted to the Romans by the divine apostle Peter and which was now professed by the Pope in Rome and the Bishop of Alexandria at the key centers of Nicene Orthodoxy. It declared that followers of this creed should be called Catholic Christians. As for everyone else, the edict labeled them foolish madmen and heretics, stating they would face not only divine condemnation, but also punishment from the state, which we have received from heavenly purity. This was a seismic shift. Constantine had granted tolerance. Theodosius demanded conformity. He wasn't just suggesting a preferred religion. He was legally defining Orthodox belief and outlawing all other interpretations of Christianity. Arianism, once a powerful rival, was now officially a heresy, punishable by law. Upon arriving in Constantinople, Theodosius put his words into action. The capital city was a hotbed of Arianism. The Arian bishop held the city's most prominent churches. Theodosius promptly expelled him and handed over all the churches in the city to the Nicene. He then convened a new council in 381, the First Council of Constantinople. This council reaffirmed and expanded upon the Nicene Creed, clarifying the doctrine of the Holy Spirit and finalizing the theological framework of the Trinity that is still central to Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and most Protestant denominations today. Bedtime, Theodosius effectively ended the Arian controversy within the empire's power structures. He used the full weight of imperial authority to settle a theological debate that had raged for over half a century. But Theodosius's vision of a Christian empire didn't just target other Christians. It also marked the beginning of the end for Roman paganism, the ancient system of gods and rituals that had been the state religion for over 1,000 years. While paganism was already in decline, it still had powerful adherents, especially among the old senatorial aristocracy in Rome. Theodosius began a series of escalating measures against it. Initially, he continued the policy of withdrawing state funds from pagan cults, but over time the laws became stricter. In 391, he banned public pagan sacrifices and ordered the closure of temples throughout the empire. The eternal flame of Vesta in the Roman Forum, a sacred symbol of Rome's endurance that had burned for centuries, was extinguished. The famous oracle at Delphi fell silent. The Olympic Games, held for over a millennium in honor of Zeus, were celebrated for the last time in 393 and then banned as a pagan festival. These actions weren't always peaceful. In Alexandria, a center of both Christian and pagan intellectual life, tensions boiled over. Encouraged by the emperor's anti-pagan laws, the local bishop led a mob that destroyed one of the most magnificent temples in the entire ancient world, which was said to house a part of the great library of Alexandria. The destruction of the Serapeum was a powerful symbol. The old world of gods and philosophy was being violently torn down to make way for the new Christian order. Theodosius's reign culminated in a dramatic event that showcased the new power dynamic between church and state. In 390, the military governor in Thessalonica arrested a popular charioteer, causing a riot in which the governor and several officials were killed. In a fit of rage, Theodosius ordered a brutal retaliation. His soldiers trapped thousands of citizens in the city's circus and massacred them. The news horrified the empire. The influential bishop of Milan, Ambrose, was appalled. He took the unprecedented step of excommunicating the emperor himself. He barred Theodosius from entering the church and demanded public penance. Think about that for a moment. A bishop, a religious leader, was openly defying the most powerful man in the world. Roman emperor, who was traditionally seen as a near-divine figure. And what's more, Theodosius complied. After months of standoff, the emperor publicly stripped himself of his imperial insignia, entered the cathedral in Milan as a humble penitent, and begged for forgiveness. This act was revolutionary. It demonstrated that even the emperor was subject to the moral authority of the church. A new power had truly arrived, one that could hold even an emperor accountable. By the time Theodosius died in 395, the Roman Empire was fundamentally changed. He was the last emperor to rule over a united Eastern and Western empire. More importantly, he had firmly established Nicene Christianity as the exclusive, official religion of the state. He had used imperial law to define orthodoxy, suppressed heresy, and dismantled the last vestiges of institutional paganism. His deep personal faith, combined with his political will, created the template for what would become Christendom, a civilization where political power and Christian faith were inextricably linked. The world we live in today, with its deep roots in Christian thought and culture, was shaped in no small part by the decisive and unyielding actions of Theodosius the Great. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the past insightful, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the moments that defined our world. We'll see you next time. Hello, history buffs, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most pivotal moments in Western history, a decision that would reshape an empire and echo through millennia. We're talking about the year 380 CE and the monumental Edict of Thessalonica. Imagine the Roman Empire, a vast mosaic of cultures, languages, and, most importantly, religions. For centuries, the traditional Roman pantheon had reigned, but new faiths, especially Christianity, were spreading like wildfire. This religious landscape was a complex, often chaotic, mix of beliefs. You had the old gods, various mystery cults, and dozens of Christian sects, all vying for the hearts and minds of the people. It was a time of intense debate and spiritual searching. What did it mean to be a Roman? Was it about honoring Jupiter, or following a new path? This was the world that Emperor Theodosius the Great inherited. Theodosius ascended to power in a divided empire, still reeling from decades of civil wars and external threats. He wasn't just a military commander. He was a devout Christian, and he saw religious unity as the key to imperial stability. To him, the endless theological squabbles weren't just a nuisance. They were a weakness that threatened the very fabric of Roman society. At the heart of these Christian debates was a major controversy: Arianism versus Nicene Christianity. Put simply, the Arians believed that Jesus Christ was a created being, subordinate to God the Father. The Nicenes, on the other hand, held that the Son was of the same substance as de fate co-equal and co-eternal. This wasn't some minor theological quibble. It was a fundamental question about the nature of God, and it had been causing deep divisions within the Church for over half a century. Since the Council of Nicaea in 325, Theodosius was a firm supporter of the Nicene Creed. He believed it was the one true faith, the orthodox path, and he was determined to make it the standard for his entire empire. And so, on February 27th, 380 CE, alongside his co-emperors Gratian and Valentinian II, Theodosius issued a decree that would change everything. From the city of Thessalonica, the edict known as Cunctus Populus, which means to all the peoples, was proclaimed. Its language was clear and uncompromising. It commanded all subjects of the Roman Empire to adhere to the faith, which the Apostle Peter is said to have delivered to the Romans. The faith now professed by the Pope in Rome and the Bishop of Alexandria. This was, explicitly, Nicene Christianity. The edict went on to declare that only those who followed this doctrine could call themselves Catholic Christians, everyone else, and this is the crucial part, was branded as a foolish madman and a heretic. Their meeting places could no longer be called churches, and they were to face not only divine condemnation but also punishment, which our authority, from the will of heaven, shall decide to inflict. This was an absolute earthquake. For the first time in its long history, the Roman Empire had an official, state-sanctioned religion. The policy of relative tolerance, which had, with some notable exceptions, characterized Roman religious life, was over. The Edict of Thessalonica didn't just promote one version of Christianity. It actively criminalized all others. If you were an Arian, a Gnostic, a Manichaean, or any other non-Nicene Christian, you were now an enemy of the state. And it wasn't just about other Christian sects. The edict marked the beginning of the end for traditional Roman paganism. The ancient temples, the sacrifices to the gods that had protected Rome for over 1,000 years, their days were numbered. Theodosius followed up the Edict of Thessalonica with a series of even more aggressive laws in the following years, which became known as the Theodosian Decree. These laws explicitly banned pagan rituals. Public funding for pagan cults was cut off. The eternal flame of Vesta in the heart of Rome, which had burned for centuries, was extinguished. The oracle at Delphi fell silent. The Olympic Games, a religious festival in honor of Zeus, were held for the last time in 393 and then banned. The consequences were profound and immediate. Bishops who followed the Nicene Creed were now backed by the full power of the imperial state. They could use the law to seize churches from Arian clergy and exile those who refused to conform. This created a powerful alliance between the throne and the altar, where the state enforced religious orthodoxy, and the church, in turn, lent its moral authority to the emperor. This fusion of religious and political power would become the defining characteristic of the Byzantine Empire in the East, and would deeply influence the development of the kingdoms that emerged after the fall of the West. It laid the groundwork for the concept of Christendom, a unified Christian society. But this unity came at a high price. The persecution that Christians had once endured was now being inflicted by Christians upon others. Libraries containing heretical or pagan texts were sometimes destroyed, a tragic loss of ancient knowledge. The vibrant, diverse religious marketplace of the Roman world was forcibly consolidated. Think about the impact on the average person. Imagine you were a Roman citizen who had always honored the traditional gods. Suddenly, the rituals your family had practiced for generations were illegal. Your local temple was closed. Its statues perhaps toppled or melted down. Or imagine you were a Christian who followed Arian teachings. Your priest is now a criminal, and your community is forced to meet in secret, fearing raids from imperial soldiers. The Edict of Thessalonica created a new social and legal hierarchy based entirely on religious belief. Being a Nicene Christian wasn't just a matter of faith anymore. It was a prerequisite for full participation in society, for career advancement, and for being on the right side of the law. This set a powerful and often dangerous precedent for the relationship between religion and state power that would shape European history for the next 1,500 years. So, when we look back at the Edict of Thessalonica, we see a moment of profound transformation. It was the culmination of Christianity's incredible journey from a persecuted minority sect to the official, exclusive religion of the world's most powerful empire. It ensured the dominance of the Nicene version of Christianity, which would evolve into the Catholic and Orthodox churches we know today. However, it also marked the end of the ancient pagan world and the beginning of an era where religious dissent was met with state-sponsored suppression. Theodosius' decree for unity ultimately created new divisions and set the stage for centuries of conflict over faith and power. It's a stark reminder of how a single decision, a few lines of text in an imperial edict, can fundamentally alter the course of civilization. What do you think? Was Theodosius a visionary leader who unified the empire, or did his edict unleash a new era of intolerance? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. We love hearing from you and reading your perspectives on these complex historical moments. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into history, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another episode. We'll see you next time. Have you ever stood in a ruin and felt the echo of a forgotten world? Imagine, for a moment, a time when the air itself thrummed with the presence of gods and goddesses. A time when marble temples, gleaming under a Mediterranean sun, were the centers of life, belief, and community. These weren't just buildings. They were the homes of deities, where mortals came to seek favor, offer thanks, and feel a connection to something larger than themselves. From the Grand Parthenon in Athens to the smallest local shrine in a secluded grove, the ancient world was a tapestry woven with threads of divine worship. Every sunrise, every harvest, every voyage was under the watchful eyes of the gods. But what happens when those eyes close? What happens when the gods fall silent? This is the story of the fall of pagan temples, not a story of a single, cataclysmic event, but a slow, quiet fading. It's a tale of how an entire world of belief receded like the tide, leaving behind a landscape of silent stone and lingering whispers. Join us as we walk through the twilight of the old gods and explore the profound silence that fell over their sacred homes. To understand the fall, we must first appreciate the height from which they fell. Imagine the city of Rome in its prime. The air is thick with the scent of incense, the sound of chanting priests, the lowing of sacrificial animals. The Roman Forum is a bustling heart of commerce and politics, but it's also a sacred landscape, dotted with temples to Jupiter, Juno, Mars, and Vesta. Here, religion was not a private affair, but a public duty. A civic spectacle. The Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, was a contract between mortals and the divine. As long as the proper rituals were performed, the gods would ensure the prosperity and stability of the empire. Across the provinces, from Britain to Egypt, this pattern was replicated. Local deities were often synthesized with Roman ones in a process called syncretism. The Celtic goddess Sulis, worshipped at the hot springs in modern-day Bath, became Sulis Minerva. In this way, the empire created a vast, interconnected network of belief, a spiritual fabric that helped hold its diverse peoples together. These temples were vibrant hubs. They were banks, art galleries, community centers, and places of healing. Their priests and priestesses were respected figures, their festivals the highlights of the calendar year. To the people of that time, it would have been inconceivable that this world could ever end. It felt as eternal as the stone from which the temples were built. The winds of change, however, began to blow from the east. A new faith, Christianity, offered a different kind of promise. It was monotheistic, exclusive, and intensely personal. It spoke not of a contract with many gods for the benefit of the state, but of a personal relationship with one God for the salvation of the individual soul. At first, it was just one of many mystery cults that were popular across the empire, like the cults of Mithras or Isis. But it was different. It was organized, it was evangelistic, and its followers were willing to face persecution and martyrdom for their beliefs. As Christianity grew, tension was inevitable. The old and the new began to clash. Christians refused to participate in the state-sponsored sacrifices, viewing them as idolatry. To the Romans, this wasn't just a matter of personal choice. It was an act of subversion, a rejection of the very traditions that guaranteed the safety of the empire. This led to periods of intense, though often localized, persecution. Yet, the faith continued to spread. It found followers among the poor, the enslaved, and women, offering them a dignity and hope that the traditional civic religion often did not. The turning point came in the 4th century with Emperor Constantine. His conversion in the Edict of Milan in 313 AD granted tolerance to Christianity. Suddenly, The faith of the persecuted became the faith of the powerful. This was the beginning of the end for the old gods. The transition wasn't immediate. For a time, the two faiths coexisted, sometimes uneasily. An aristocrat might worship Christ in the morning and still privately consult an oracle in the afternoon. But the momentum had shifted irrevocably. With imperial favor came imperial funds. Instead of flowing to the upkeep of pagan temples, money was now directed towards building grand basilicas and churches. The intellectual and artistic energy of the age, which had once been dedicated to celebrating the Olympian gods, was now refocused on the stories and theology of Christianity. The slow abandonment had begun. Imagine being a priest of Apollo in a small provincial town. For generations, your family has tended the sacred flame, but now, the annual festival is sparsely attended. The donations have dwindled. The local governor, a recent convert, now shuns the temple he once patronized. The roof begins to leak, and there is no money for repairs. The beautiful frescoes on the walls start to peel. The rituals, once performed with a full retinue of attendants, are now conducted by you alone, your voice echoing in an increasingly empty hall. This was the reality in thousands of locations. The fall was not a thunderous collapse, but a gradual decay. It was the sound of a door creaking shut, of footsteps fading away. Emperor Theodosius, later in the 4th century, delivered the final blows. He issued a series of edicts that progressively outlawed pagan practices. Sacrifices were banned. Temples were officially closed. The eternal flame of Vesta in Rome, which had burned for over 1,000 years, was extinguished. The Olympic Games, held in honor of Zeus for more than a millennium, were held for the last time. What happened to the temples themselves? Their fates were varied and symbolic of the changing world. Some, like the Parthenon in Athens, were converted into churches. The statue of Athena was removed, and in its place, an altar to the Virgin Mary was erected. The divine residence was not destroyed, but repurposed, its sacredness transferred to a new deity. Others were simply stripped of their valuables. Their bronze doors were melted down. Their marble statues were toppled and broken, or hauled away to be burned in lime kilns to make mortar. Bronze and marble, once the very image of the gods, were reduced to raw materials for the new Christian world. Many more were simply abandoned to the elements. They became quarries for local builders, their perfectly cut stones repurposed for new city walls, homes, and churches. If you look closely at the walls of many old European cities, you can sometimes see a piece of a Roman column or a fragment of a temple inscription, a ghost of a pagan past embedded in a Christian present. The rest were slowly reclaimed by nature. Ivy crept over the walls. Trees grew up through the mosaic floors, and birds nested in the eaves where priests once chanted. The homes of the gods became silent, overgrown ruins. The silence that fell was profound. It was the end of oracles, of festivals, of public sacrifice. The world, once filled with 1,000 divine voices, now listened for the voice of a single god. This transition was not without its moments of resistance or sadness. The philosopher Libanius, in the late 4th century, wrote a passionate plea to the emperor, lamenting the destruction of the temples. He described them as the eyes of the countryside, and their ruin as a spiritual blindness falling over the land. For many, this was not a triumphant victory of light over darkness, but a profound cultural loss, the severing of a connection to their ancestors and their history. They saw the world becoming less colorful, less magical. The nymphs and dryads were chased from their groves, the spirits from their rivers. The world was being disenchanted. Today, we walk among these ruins as tourists. We admire the architectural genius. We take photos of the fallen columns. We try to imagine what it was like, but it's hard to truly grasp the spiritual void left by their abandonment. When we stand in the Roman Forum, or at the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, we are standing in a place that has been silenced. The gods may have departed, their rituals forgotten, but the stones remember. They hold the echo of prayers, the scent of ancient incense, and the weight of 1,000 years of belief. The fall of the pagan temples wasn't just an architectural event. It was the end of an entire way of seeing the world, a slow, quiet sunset that bathed the ancient world in a long and final twilight. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the past. If you found this exploration of a world's end as fascinating as we did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories from the quiet corners of history. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time. Ever wondered who could tell an all-powerful Roman emperor no and get away with it? It sounds like a fairy tale, but it actually happened. In the late 4th century, the Roman Empire was ruled by Theodosius the Great, a man who held absolute power. Yet, there was one figure who dared to challenge him, not with swords or armies, but with something far more potent, moral authority. This man was Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan. Their relationship would not only define an era, but would forever change the balance of power between church and state in the Western world. This isn't just a story about politics. It's a gripping human drama of faith, power, repentance, and the dawn of a new kind of authority. Stick around as we unravel the epic confrontation between an emperor and a bishop. To understand their dynamic, we first need to meet our two main characters. On one side, we have Flavius Theodosius. Born in Hispania, he was a skilled general who ascended to the imperial throne in 379 AD. He's remembered as the Great for a reason. He was the last emperor to rule over a truly unified Roman Empire, a devout Christian who made Nicene Christianity the official state religion. He was powerful, pious, and accustomed to having his commands obeyed without question. An emperor in this era was seen as God's chosen representative on earth. His word was literally law. On the other side, we have Ambrose. He wasn't born into the clergy. In fact, he had a successful career as a Roman governor. He was so respected for his fairness and leadership that in 374 AD, when the Bishop of Milan died, the people of the city, a mix of Arian and Nicene Christians, were on the brink of rioting over the succession. Ambrose went to the cathedral to calm the crowd. In a stunning turn of events, a child's voice reportedly cried out, "Ambrose for bishop!" The crowd took up the chant, and despite his protests, he wasn't even baptized yet. Ambrose was acclaimed as the new bishop. He was a man of principle, a brilliant orator, and deeply committed to his new role, believing the church had a sacred duty to guide all souls, even the emperors. So you have these two colossal figures in Milan, which was the de facto capital of the Western Roman Empire at the time. The emperor and the bishop. For a while, their relationship was one of close alliance. Theodosius respected Ambrose's intellect and piety, and Ambrose supported the emperor's efforts to promote Orthodox Christianity. Ambrose became a trusted advisor, guiding Theodosius on matters of both faith and state. It seemed like a perfect partnership. The emperor provided the political power to enforce Christian doctrine, and the bishop provided the spiritual and moral legitimacy. This alliance was crucial in suppressing paganism and other Christian heresies, shaping the religious landscape of Europe for centuries to come. But this cozy relationship was about to be tested in the most dramatic way possible. The first major clash came in 388 AD, in a town called Callinicum, on the eastern frontier. A mob of Christians, incited by their local bishop, had burned down a synagogue. For Theodosius, this was a simple matter of law and order. He commanded that the Christians responsible rebuild the synagogue at their own expense. It was a just and reasonable order from a Roman administrator's point of view. But for Ambrose, it was an outrage. He saw it as forcing Christians to fund a place of worship for a faith they considered incorrect. He wrote to the emperor, arguing that the state should not compel the church to support its spiritual rivals. Theodosius initially ignored the letter. This is where Ambrose showed his mettle. He didn't just let it go. The next time, the emperor attended service at the cathedral in Milan. Ambrose preached a sermon directly aimed at him. He spoke of the church's duty and the emperor's place within it, not above it. He then refused to offer the Eucharist until Theodosius backed down. Imagine the scene. The most powerful man in the world, sitting in his imperial box, being publicly called out and denied communion by his own bishop. The pressure was immense. The congregation was watching. The entire empire was watching. Humbled and cornered, Theodosius relented. He rescinded his order. It was a stunning victory for Ambrose. The bishop had proven that his spiritual authority could, in fact, overrule the emperor's temporal power. This set a precedent that would echo for 1,000 years. But the most famous and intense confrontation was yet to come. In 390 AD, a beloved charioteer was arrested in the city of Thessalonica. The citizens were furious and rioted, killing the local Roman garrison commander and other officials. When news reached Theodosius in Milan, he flew into a rage. In a moment of fury, he ordered a brutal retaliation. His soldiers marched into Thessalonica, lured the citizens into the circus under false pretenses, and then massacred them. Sources say that up to 7,000 men, women, and children were slaughtered indiscriminately. It was a horrific act of collective punishment. When Ambrose heard of the massacre, he was appalled. This wasn't a legal dispute. This was a monstrous sin. He wrote Theodosius a private, deeply personal letter, filled with sorrow and condemnation. He urged the emperor to repent, but he also made it clear that until he did, he would be barred from the church. Ambrose wrote, "I dare not offer the sacrifice if you intend to be present. Is that which is not allowed after the blood of one innocent person has been shed to be allowed where the blood of many has been shed?" He effectively excommunicated the emperor of Rome. This was an unprecedented move. No bishop had ever dared to do such a thing to a reigning emperor. Theodosius, accustomed to absolute authority, was now an outcast from his own state church. He tried to enter the cathedral in Milan, but Ambrose personally blocked his path, standing at the doorway and refusing him entry. For months, Theodosius remained in a state of public penance. He was the master of the world, yet he couldn't receive the sacraments that he, as a devout Christian, believed were essential for his salvation. The psychological and political pressure must have been unbearable. The emperor was powerful, but the bishop held the keys to heaven. Finally, on Christmas Day of 390 AD, Theodosius submitted completely. He came to the cathedral, not in his imperial robes, but as a humble penitent. He publicly confessed his sin and begged for forgiveness before the entire congregation. It was a moment of incredible theater and profound significance. Ambrose, seeing his genuine remorse, absolved him and welcomed him back into the church. The emperor of Rome had been humbled by a bishop. He had been forced to acknowledge that even he was subject to God's law, as interpreted and enforced by the church. So, what does this all mean? The confrontations between Theodosius and Ambrose were a watershed moment in Western history. They established a powerful new principle. The moral and spiritual authority of the church could stand as a check on the absolute power of the state. Ambrose famously declared, "The emperor is within the church, not above it." This idea laid the groundwork for the medieval concept of the two swords, one of spiritual power wielded by the papacy, and one of temporal power wielded by kings, with the spiritual sword often seen as superior. It solidified the role of bishops not just as spiritual leaders, but as powerful political figures, defenders of justice, and the conscience of the kingdom. The legacy of this power struggle is immense. It shaped the dynamic between popes and emperors throughout the Middle Ages, leading to epic clashes like the investiture controversy. It embedded the idea deep within the Western psyche that there is a moral law that transcends the will of the ruler. This concept would later influence the development of ideas about limited government, human rights, and the rule of law. It is a direct line from Ambrose standing in that cathedral doorway to the very principles that underpin many modern democracies. The idea that no one, not even the most powerful ruler, is above the law. And so, the story of Theodosius and Ambrose is more than just an ancient anecdote. It's a foundational story of the West. It demonstrates how faith, courage, and moral conviction can challenge and even reshape the mightiest of empires. It shows the birth of the church as a major political force, a role it would play for well over a millennium. It's a reminder that true power doesn't always come from armies and gold, but sometimes from the courage to speak truth to power, no matter the cost. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to the dramatic world of late antiquity. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the pivotal moments that shaped our world. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Who do you think truly held the power in this relationship? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Imagine a world where an emperor, a man who held the lives of millions in his hands, was brought to his knees, not by a conquering army, but by a single, unwavering voice of conscience. This isn't a fantasy tale. It's a pivotal, dramatic moment from the late Roman Empire. Today, we journey back to the year 390 CE to unravel the story of a city in rebellion, a horrific massacre, and an unprecedented clash between imperial power and spiritual authority. This is the story of Emperor Theodosius, Bishop Ambrose, and the tragedy of Thessalonica. Let's set the stage. The Roman Empire in the late 4th century was a complex, sprawling entity. Emperor Theodosius the Great, a devout Christian, ruled from his court, striving to maintain order across vast territories. In the vibrant city of Thessalonica, modern-day Thessaloniki in Greece, the Roman military garrison was a constant presence. The commander of this garrison was a man named Buthric, a Goth by birth, which was common for high-ranking military officials at the time. The city was a hotbed of passions, and no passion ran higher than the love for chariot racing. The charioteers were superstars, adored by the public. One of the most famous and beloved charioteers in Thessalonica found himself on the wrong side of the law. He was arrested on charges of scandalous behavior, and Commander Buthric, upholding the law, had him imprisoned. This decision was wildly unpopular. The citizens of Thessalonica were incensed. To them, arresting their favorite charioteer right before major games was an insult, a blatant disregard for their passions. The discontent simmered, then boiled over. A crowd gathered, demanding the charioteer's release. When their demands were met with refusal, the protest escalated into a full-blown riot. The mob's fury turned deadly. In the chaos, they targeted the symbols of imperial authority. Commander Buthric and several other high-ranking officials were attacked and brutally killed. News of the rebellion and the murder of his general reached Emperor Theodosius in Milan. He was utterly enraged. This was not just a riot. It was an act of treason, a direct assault on his authority. In his fury, he made a fateful decision. He resolved to make an example of Thessalonica, to teach every citizen of the empire the bloody cost of defying Roman rule. An order was dispatched. The city was to be punished severely. The imperial response was as swift as it was horrifying. Soldiers were sent to Thessalonica, but not to restore order. They were sent to exact revenge. The city's residents were lured into the hippodrome, the very circus where they cheered for their charioteers, under the pretense of a public spectacle. Once the gates were sealed, the soldiers were unleashed. What followed was a scene of unspeakable carnage. For 3 hours, the soldiers indiscriminately slaughtered the trapped citizens. Men, women, children, it didn't matter. They were all victims of the emperor's wrath. Contemporary accounts estimate that 7,000 people were massacred. The hippodrome, once a place of entertainment and civic pride, was transformed into a river of blood, a monument to imperial fury. The tragedy of Thessalonica sent a shockwave of horror across the empire. Now, let's travel back to Milan, the emperor's court. Here, another powerful figure watched these events unfold with growing dread. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan. Ambrose was no ordinary priest. He was a formidable intellectual, a skilled politician, and a man of unshakable moral conviction. He had a close relationship with Theodosius, often acting as his spiritual advisor. When he heard about the massacre, he was profoundly shocked and appalled. For Ambrose, this wasn't a matter of statecraft. It was a matter of sin. The emperor, a self-professed Christian, had the blood of thousands of innocent people on his hands. In Ambrose's eyes, Theodosius had committed a mortal sin of the highest order. He couldn't just stand by and let it pass. The spiritual health of the emperor and the moral integrity of the church were at stake. Ambrose wrote a private, yet firm, letter to Theodosius. He didn't mince words. He condemned the massacre as a heinous act and told the emperor that he, as a man stained with innocent blood, was no longer welcome to participate in the sacred rites of the church. Ambrose effectively excommunicated the most powerful man in the world. He barred Theodosius from receiving communion until he had atoned for his sin. Imagine the emperor's position. He was Theodosius the Great, Augustus, ruler of the Roman world. Who was this bishop to deny him entry into his own church? Theodosius initially tried to ignore Ambrose's edict. He was the emperor, after all. He attempted to attend service as usual, but Ambrose was resolute. He physically blocked the emperor at the door of the basilica in Milan. A moment of incredible cinematic drama. He looked the emperor in the eye and refused him entry, stating that he could not offer the Holy Sacrament to hands dripping with the blood of the innocent. This was an unprecedented standoff. On one side, the absolute temporal power of the Roman emperor. On the other, the unyielding spiritual authority of the Church. For months, Theodosius remained in a state of spiritual exile. The weight of his actions and the bishop's condemnation pressed heavily upon him. He was a devout man, and being cut off from his faith was a source of deep personal torment. The public spectacle of the emperor being barred from church also began to chip away at his authority. He was losing the moral high ground. Finally, Theodosius broke. He understood that he could not win this battle. More importantly, his own conscience convicted him. He approached Ambrose, not as an emperor, but as a penitent sinner, asking what he must do to be readmitted to the church. Ambrose's terms were clear. Theodosius had to perform public penance. He had to publicly and humbly acknowledge his sin before God and the people. And so, on Christmas Day of 390 CE, the world witnessed an extraordinary sight. Theodosius the Great, the mighty Roman emperor, stripped off his imperial robes and purple regalia, dressed in simple, sackcloth-like garmenta, attire of a common mourner, he entered the basilica. In Milan, he prostrated himself on the floor, weeping and praying for forgiveness in full view of the congregation. He publicly confessed his guilt for the massacre at Thessalonica, showing a humility rarely, if ever, seen from a Roman ruler. This act of public penance was a moment of profound significance. It wasn't just about one man's personal salvation. It was a powerful declaration that no one, not even the emperor, was above the moral law of God. It established a new dynamic between the secular state and the spiritual church. For the first time, an emperor had been publicly held accountable for his actions by a religious leader, setting a precedent that would echo for centuries, shaping the relationship between kings and popes throughout the Middle Ages. Theodosius's penance also reveals a different side of the emperor. While his initial order was born of tyrannical rage, his ultimate submission showed a capacity for remorse, humility, and a genuine fear of God. It showed his humanity. He wasn't just a distant, all-powerful ruler. He was a man who struggled with his own failings and sought redemption. After his period of penance was complete, Theodosius was readmitted to the church by Ambrose, his relationship with both the bishop and his faith restored. He even enacted a law stating that a 30-day waiting period must pass between a death sentence and its execution, a direct legislative response to his own rash, bloody order. The tragedy of Thessalonica and the subsequent penance of Theodosius is more than just a dramatic historical episode. It's a story about the eternal struggle between power and conscience, between earthly authority and divine law. It reminds us that leadership comes with immense moral responsibility, and that even the most powerful can be humbled by the call for justice and humanity. It's a testament to the courage of individuals like Bishop Ambrose, who dared to speak truth to power, changing the course of history in the process. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story as compelling as I do, please hit that like button, and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the fascinating and often dramatic moments that have shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what you think about this incredible showdown between emperor and bishop. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through history. Today, we're re-diving into a pivotal moment that forever changed the course of Western civilization. The dramatic clash and eventual reconciliation between an emperor and a bishop. This isn't just a story of two powerful men. It's the story of how the Roman Empire became fundamentally Christian, and how the relationship between church and state was forged in a crucible of faith, power, and politics. Our protagonists? The Roman Emperor Theodosius. The Roman Emperor Theodosius the Great. To understand the magnitude of their encounter, let's set the stage. We're in the late 4th century. The Roman Empire is officially Christian, thanks to Constantine's conversion decades earlier. But the exact nature of this new Christian empire is still very much up for grabs. What is the role of the emperor? Is he the head of the church, a servant of it, or something else entirely? What is the role of a bishop? Is he merely a spiritual guide, or a wielder of genuine political power? These were the burning questions of the day, and they would be answered not through a calm debate, but through a series of dramatic confrontations. Our first key player is Theodosius. Born in Hispania, he was a skilled general who ascended to the throne in 379 AD, tasked with stabilizing a fractured empire. He was a devout Nicene Christian, and one of his first major acts was the Edict of Thessalonica in 380 AD. This decree didn't just tolerate Nicene Christianity, it made it the official state religion of the Roman Empire. All other Christian creeds were declared heretical, and traditional Roman paganism was increasingly suppressed. Theodosius envisioned a unified empire under a single, unified faith. In his mind, the emperor was God's chosen representative on earth, responsible for enforcing orthodoxy and protecting the church. He was, for all intents and purposes, the supreme authority in both secular and religious matters. Or so he thought. Enter our second protagonist, Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan. Milan, at the time, was the de facto capital of the Western Roman Empire, the seat of the imperial court. Ambrose was not your typical clergyman. He was a former Roman governor, a master of rhetoric and law, who had been acclaimed bishop by the people of Milan before he was even baptized. He was charismatic, intelligent, and utterly convinced of the church's spiritual authority over all Christians, including the emperor himself. Ambrose's core belief was simple but revolutionary. The emperor is in the church, not above it. For him, when it came to matters of faith and morality, a bishop's authority, derived from God, superseded an emperor's. The stage was set for a collision, and it came sooner than anyone expected. One of the first major tests was the Altar of Victory controversy. This ancient statue in the Roman Senate House was a powerful symbol of Rome's pagan past and its traditions. Devout pagans, led by the senator Symmachus, petitioned to have it restored. Ambrose vehemently opposed this. He wrote directly to the young Emperor Valentinian II, who was carousing with Theodosius, and effectively threatened him with excommunication if he restored the altar. Ambrose argued that a Christian emperor could not officially sanction pagan worship. His powerful rhetoric and political pressure worked. The altar remained removed, a clear victory for the church's influence over state policy. This was a clear signal. The old ways were finished, and the church now had a veto on matters of public religion. But the defining showdown, the event that would echo through the centuries, was yet to come. It would take place in 390 AD, and is known as the Massacre of Thessalonica. The story begins with a riot in that Greek city. A popular charioteer had been arrested by the local Roman garrison commander, and the enraged populace rioted, killing the commander and several other officials. When news reached Theodosius in Milan, he was consumed by rage. In a fit of fury, he ordered a brutal retaliation. His troops lured the citizens of Thessalonica into the hippodrome under the pretense of a public game, and then the gates were locked. Soldiers descended on the unarmed crowd, slaughtering thousands of men, women, and children. Estimates range from 7,000 to 15,000 people killed. It was a horrific act of collective punishment. When Ambrose learned of the massacre, he was appalled. This wasn't a matter of state policy. It was a matter of sin. A Christian emperor had shed the blood of innocent Christians. Ambrose saw it as his sacred duty to act. He wrote a private, but firm, letter to Theodosius. He didn't challenge his imperial authority to punish crime, but he condemned the brutal, indiscriminate nature of the slaughter. He informed the emperor that he, Theodosius, was stained by this sin, and, as a result, he was barred from receiving communion. In essence, the Bishop of Milan had excommunicated the most powerful man in the world. Imagine the audacity. This was unprecedented. No bishop had ever dared to so publicly and directly confront an emperor on a matter of personal morality and hold him accountable before God. Theodosius was stunned. At first, he was defiant. He was the emperor, God's chosen. Who was this bishop to deny him entry into his own imperial church? He reportedly tried to enter the cathedral in Milan, but Ambrose physically blocked his path, standing at the doorway and refusing him entry. This imaged the humble bishop turning away the mighty emperor. 4 weeks, a tense standoff ensued. Theodosius was isolated, unable to participate in the central rite of his faith. The political and spiritual pressure was immense. Ambrose wasn't just a local priest. He was one of the most respected figures in the entire Christian world. His stand resonated with believers everywhere. Finally, Theodosius broke. The weight of his guilt and his public exclusion from the church became too much to bear. Submitted. On Christmas Day in 398, the Emperor Theodosius the Great entered the Cathedral of Milan, not in his glorious imperial robes, but as a pen. He publicly stripped himself of his imperial insignia, prostrated himself on the floor, and wept, begging for God's forgiveness in front of the entire congregation. It was a moment of incredible political theater and profound religious significance. The emperor, the master of the world, was publicly acknowledging a higher authority, the moral law of the church. Ambrose then absolved him and welcomed him back into communion. This act of public penance was a watershed moment. It fundamentally redefined the relationship between temporal and spiritual power. By submitting to Ambrose, Theodosius implicitly validated the bishop's claim that the emperor was in the church, not above it. He established a powerful precedent. Even the most powerful ruler on earth was subject to the moral judgment of the church. This created a new model of Christian kingship. A good Christian ruler was not just a conqueror or an administrator. He was a pious servant of God, morally accountable to the church's leaders. His power was not absolute. It was conditional on his adherence to Christian morality. This principle became the bedrock of political theory throughout the Middle Ages. For the next 1,000 years, popes and kings, emperors and patriarchs would wrestle with the implications of what happened in Milan. The idea that spiritual authority could check secular power, that a king could be excommunicated for sin, that a priest could stand up to an emperor. All of this traces back to Ambrose and Theodosius. This Colossian doctrine, later articulated as the two swords theory of spiritual and temporal power, dominated medieval European politics. The reconciliation between Theodosius and Ambrose didn't weaken the empire. In a way, it strengthened it by creating a new, powerful source of social cohesion. The unity of faith and empire was cemented. The state would protect and enforce the church's orthodoxy, and the church would provide the moral and spiritual legitimacy for the state's authority. This symbiotic relationship where the throne and the altar supported each other would become the defining characteristic of the Byzantine Empire in the East, and would be the ideal strived for by rulers like Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Emperors in the West. So, the next time you think about the separation of church and state, remember this dramatic story from the late 4th century. It was here, in the confrontation between a furious emperor and a fearless bishop, that the very foundations of Western political thought were laid. It was a clash that defined the soul of a new Christian world and created a model of power that would shape the destiny of nations for a millennium. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found this story as fascinating as I do. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into history. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Step into the mists of time with me, to a world where gods and mortals walked hand in hand, where the cheers of 100,000 spectators echoed through valleys of marble and olive groves. This is the story of an end, not just the end of a game, but the twilight of an entire world. Welcome to the final days of the ancient Olympic Games. For over 1,000 years, a sacred truce would fall across the often warring city-states of Greece. Every 4 years, a flame was lit in Olympia, a signal that transcended politics and conflict. It was a call to come together, not in battle, but in the purest celebration of human potential. Athletes, poets, philosophers, and kings would journey to this hallowed ground, all drawn by the magnetic pull of the games. Imagine the scene. The sun beats down on the stadium. The air is thick with the scent of dust, sweat, and sacrificial smoke wafting from the great altar of Zeus. You see discus throwers, their bodies sculpted like the statues of the gods they honored. spinning with grace and power. You hear the thunder of chariot wheels, the desperate panting of runners in the grueling hoplitodromos, clad in the heavy bronze armor of a soldier. This wasn't just sport, it was a religious festival, a form of worship, a dialogue with the divine. Each victory was an offering, each defeat a lesson in humility before the gods of Olympus. The champions were more than just winners. They were heroes, showered with glory, their names sung by poets, their statues erected to inspire future generations. An Olympic victor was crowned with a simple wreath of olive leaves. Yet this humble crown was worth more than any gold. It symbolized a connection to the gods, a moment of mortal perfection that touched the eternal. The games were the heartbeat of Hellenic culture, a constant, rhythmic pulse that had beaten for centuries. But even the strongest heart can falter. A new power was rising, a new faith spreading across the Roman Empire, which now ruled Greece. This was the era of Christianity, a monotheistic religion that saw the old gods not as divine beings, but as idols, as remnants of a pagan past that needed to be cleansed. The temples, once vibrant centers of community and faith, began to fall silent. The oracles, whose cryptic prophecies had guided the destinies of nations, spoke no more. The new world had little room for the old ways. The rituals that had given the games their sacred meaning were now condemned. The sacrifices to Zeus, the hymns to Apollo were seen as blasphemous acts. The shift was gradual at first, a slow erosion. Imperial edicts chipped away at the foundations of pagan life. Temples were closed, their treasures confiscated. Philosophers who taught the old wisdom were viewed with suspicion. It was a cultural revolution, and the Olympic Games, the most magnificent symbol of that old world, were living on borrowed time. The final games were held in the year 393 AD. We don't know the names of the last victors. There were no poets to sing their praises, no sculptors to immortalize their forms. The flame at Olympia, which had burned for over a millennium, was extinguished. A decree from the Christian Emperor Theodosius I officially banned all pagan festivals. It was a simple stroke of a pen, but it ended in the silence that fell over the stadium at Olympia was profound. The cheers of generations faded into a whisper, carried away by the wind through the now empty Colosseum. What happened next was a slow, inevitable decay. Earthquakes, floods, and the passage of centuries buried the sanctuary under layers of earth. The great statue of Zeus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, vanished, likely destroyed or lost to time. Olympia, once the center of the Greek world, became a forgotten ruin, a place of ghosts and memories. The echoes of ancient Greece, the philosophies of Plato, the dramas of Sophocles, the athletic ideals of the games, they never truly disappeared. They were preserved in texts, whispered in stories, and eventually they would be read, sparking a renaissance that would reshape the world once more. But the tangible, living connection was severed. The vibrant tapestry of pagan ritual, with its festivals, its mysteries, and its deep connection to the natural world, unraveled. The end of the games was more than the cancellation of a sporting event. It was the final poignant note in the symphony of ancient Greece, a civilization that had given the world so much: democracy, philosophy, theater, and the beautiful, powerful idea that in the pursuit of excellence, a human being can for a fleeting moment become something more. When we watch the modern Olympics today, we see a legacy, the flame, the ceremony, the gathering of nations. It's all a tribute to that ancient tradition. But it is a different flame, a different spirit. We are separated by a gulf of 2,000 years, by a fundamental shift in how we see the world and our place in it. The echoes of ancient Olympia are faint now, but if you listen closely, in the roar of the modern stadium, in the dedication of an athlete pushing their limits, you can still hear them. A whisper of a time when gods were honored with sweat and strength, and victory was a prayer answered on the sun-baked earth of a sacred valley. Thank you for joining me on this journey back in time. If you were moved by the fading echoes of this lost world, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that bring history to life. We are incredibly grateful for your support. Until next time, keep listening to the whispers of the past. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through the late Roman Empire. Today, we are diving into one of the most dramatic chapters of Emperor Theodosius' reign, his wars against 2 powerful usurpers, Magnus Maximus, and Eugene. These weren't just simple clashes for political control. They were epic struggles that would define the future of the empire and its relationship with Christianity. Our story begins in 383. The Western Roman Empire was under the rule of the young Emperor Gratian, but in Britain, a charismatic general named Magnus Maximus was hailed as emperor by his troops. Maximus was ambitious and popular. He quickly crossed the English Channel into Gaul, and Gratian's army, which had once been loyal, deserted him. Gratian fled but was cornered and assassinated near Lyon. Suddenly, Maximus was the master of Britain, Gaul, and Spain. For a time, an uneasy truce settled over the empire. Theodosius, ruling in the east, had his own problems to deal with, particularly the ever-present threat from the Goths. He recognized Maximus as the legitimate ruler of the West, with the condition that he leave Italy and Africa to Gratian's younger brother, Valentinian II. It was a pragmatic move, a way to buy time, but everyone knew this delicate balance couldn't last. Theodosius was a devout Nicene Christian, while Maximus, though Christian himself, was seen as a threat to the established imperial order. The breaking point came in 387. Maximus, hungry for more power, invaded Italy, forcing the young Valentinian II and his mother Justina to flee for their lives. They sought refuge in Thessalonica, at the court of Theodosius. This was more than just a political crisis. It was a personal appeal. Theodosius, now married to Valentinian's sister Galla, had a family duty to restore his brother-in-law to the throne, but it was also a matter of divine mandate. Theodosius saw himself as God's chosen emperor, and Maximus was a murderer and a usurper who had disrupted God's plan. In the summer of 388, Theodosius marched west. His army was a formidable force, bolstered by Gothic foederati, or allied troops. The first major clash happened at the Battle of Sistia, in modern-day Croatia. Theodosius's cavalry, led by his skilled Gothic generals, proved decisive. Maximus's forces were pushed back. Another battle followed at Portovio, and once again, Theodosius was victorious. The campaign was swift and brutal. Maximus retreated to Aquileia, a fortified city in northern Italy, hoping to withstand a siege. But his support had crumbled. His own soldiers, seeing the tide turn against him, arrested him and handed him over to Theodosius. Accounts say Maximus begged for his life, but Theodosius, after a moment of hesitation, had him executed. The usurper's head was paraded through the cities of the empire, a stark warning to any who would dare challenge the legitimate emperor. With Maximus gone, Theodosius restored Valentinian II to the throne of the West. But the real power now lay firmly with Theodosius himself. Theodosius spent the next few years in Italy, primarily in Milan, consolidating his power and working closely with the influential Bishop Ambrose. This period cemented the alliance between the imperial throne and the Nicene Church. The emperor wasn't just a political leader. He was the defender of the true faith. But peace was short-lived. In 392, another crisis erupted. The young Valentinian II was found dead in his palace in Vienne, Gaul. The official report claimed it was suicide, but many suspected he was murdered by his Frankish general, Arbogast was a pagan and a man of immense power and influence, the true master of the Western army. As a barbarian, he couldn't claim the imperial title for himself, so he elevated a Roman rhetorician and court official named Eugenius to the throne. Eugenius was a Christian, but he was also tolerant of the old pagan traditions. With Arbogast's backing, he began a subtle but significant pagan revival in the West. He restored the altar of victory to the Roman Senate house, a potent symbol that had been removed by previous Christian emperors. This was a direct challenge to Theodosius and everything he stood for. The conflict was no longer just about political legitimacy. It was a holy war. It was Nicene Christianity versus a resurgent, tolerant paganism. Theodosius took 2 years to prepare his response. He gathered a massive army, once again heavily reliant on Gothic and other barbarian allies. He saw this war as a divine mission. It is said that before he marched, he consulted an Egyptian monk named John of Lycopolis, who prophesied a costly but certain victory. This solidified his belief that God was on his side. In September 394, the two armies met at the Battle of the Frigidus River, near the Julian Alps. In modern Slovenia, this battle has become legendary, a story woven with tales of divine intervention. On the first day, the fighting was fierce and bloody. Theodosius's vanguard, a force of 10,000 Gothic launched a near-suicidal assault on Eugenius's fortified positions. They were thrown back with horrific casualties. It seemed like a disaster for Theodosius. His own generals urged him to retreat, but Theodosius held firm, spending the night in prayer. According to the histories written by his Christian supporters, his faith was rewarded. During the night, a number of Arbogast soldiers defected to Theodosius's camp, and on the second day, as the battle resumed, a miracle is said to have occurred. A ferocious wind, the Bora, suddenly swept down from the mountains. It blew directly into the faces of Eugenius's army, kicking up clouds of dust that blinded them and turning their own arrows and javelins back against them. For Theodosius's men, it was as if the wind was at their backs, pushing them forward, a clear sign of God's favor. Eugenius's lines broke under the combined pressure of the imperial assault and the divine wind. His camp was overrun. Eugenius was captured and brought before Theodosius, where he was beheaded. Arbogast, seeing that all was lost, fled into the mountains and, a few days later, took his own life. The Battle of the Frigidus was a total victory for Theodosius. It was the last major attempt to challenge Christian dominance in the Roman Empire. It is when Theodosius became the sole ruler of a reunified Roman world, the last emperor to govern both East and West. His victory was seen as a definitive triumph of faith, a sign that God had chosen the Nicene Christian path for the empire. These wars were more than just military campaigns. They were ideological crusades that shaped the very soul of the late Roman Empire. Theodosius' victories over Magnus Maximus and Eugenius cemented the emperor's role as God's chosen representative on earth, and ensured that the future of the Roman world, and by extension Western civilization, would be irrevocably tied to the Christian faith. It was a pivotal moment, a violent and dramatic conclusion to a reign that had forever changed the course of history. Thank you so much for joining me today for this incredible story. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Roman history, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next episode. We love having you here, and your support means the world. See you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Imagine a Roman emperor on the eve of a climactic battle that will decide the fate of an empire. The stakes couldn't be higher. This isn't just about power, it's about the very soul of Rome. This emperor looks not to the old gods of Olympus, but to the Christian God for a sign, a divine promise of victory. Sound familiar? You might be thinking of Constantine the Great and his legendary vision of the cross before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. But today, we're talking about another pivotal moment in history, and another emperor, Theodosius the Great. Nearly 70 years after Constantine, Theodosius found himself in a remarkably similar situation, and his experience would not only echo Constantine's, but would also cement Christianity's place at the heart of the Roman world for good. To truly grasp the weight of this moment, let's set the stage. The year is 394 AD. The Roman Empire is once again fractured. In the West, a usurper named Eugenius holds power. Now, Eugenius wasn't just a political rival. He was a champion of the old pagan traditions. Supported by influential pagan senators in Rome, his rise represented a powerful, last-gasp effort to roll back the Christianization of the empire. They began restoring ancient temples, reinstating pagan ceremonies, and openly challenging the Christian faith that emperors like Theodosius had worked so hard to promote. For Theodosius, the devoutly Christian emperor of the East, this was more than a rebellion. It was a holy war. The upcoming conflict, the Battle of the Frigidus River, was a clash of civilizations, a fight between the Christian future and the pagan past. Theodosius marched his army from Constantinople towards Italy. He was a seasoned military commander, but he knew the odds were against him. Eugenius's forces were formidable, well entrenched, and fighting on their home turf. The psychological pressure was immense. The fate of his empire, his dynasty, and his faith rested on the outcome of this single battle. Like any great leader facing impossible odds, Theodosius sought divine assistance. He was a man of deep, personal faith, and he placed his trust entirely in the God of the Christians. It was during this tense period, on the eve of the battle, that a powerful event is said to have occurred, an event that mirrored Constantine's experience in a profound way. According to the historical accounts, particularly from Christian chroniclers of the time, Theodosius had a vision. In Hispania, he saw two heavenly figures, apostles, who promised him victory. Moritantat, the very symbol of his faith, the cross, became his banner of war. He saw his cause as blessed, a divine mandate to crush the pagan revival and unite the empire under the one true God. This wasn't just wishful thinking. It became the core of his strategy and the source of his unshakable resolve. He was no longer just an emperor, fighting a usurper. He was God's chosen instrument, a warrior for Christ. This powerful conviction, this vision of the cross renewed, electrified his troops. They were no longer just Roman soldiers. They were soldiers of the cross, fighting a sacred battle. Now, let's draw the parallel to Constantine. Back in 312 AD, Constantine was the underdog facing Maxim. The story goes that he saw a cross of light in the sky with the words, "Enoch signo bensis." In this sign, you will conquer. He had his soldiers paint the Shiro, a Christian symbol, on their shields, and against all odds, he won a stunning victory. This event is famously seen as the turning point for Christianity in the Roman Empire. It transformed the faith from a persecuted minority religion to one favored by the emperor himself. Constantine's vision legitimized his rule and linked imperial success directly with divine Christian favor. Theodosius's experience serves as a powerful bookend to this story. If Constantine opened the door for Christianity in the halls of power, Theodosius locked it shut against any return to paganism. His vision wasn't just a personal revelation. It was a public declaration. He was consciously framing his conflict in the same terms as Constantine. By mirroring the legendary vision, he was claiming the same divine mandate. He was telling the world, just as God gave Constantine victory to begin this Christian era, he will give me victory to secure it. This was masterful political and religious messaging. It reinforced the idea that the Roman emperor's success and the triumph of Christianity were one and the same. Victory on the battlefield would be interpreted as nothing less than God's final judgment in favor of the Christian faith. And what a victory it was. The Battle of the Frigidus was dramatic. On the first day, Theodosius's forces suffered heavy losses. Things looked grim, but Theodosius's faith did not waver. He spent the night in prayer. The next day, a miracle, or at least a very fortunate turn of events, occurred. A ferocious wind, known as the Bora, suddenly swept down the valley directly into the faces of Eugenius's army. It kicked up so much dust they could barely see, and it was said to have turned their own arrows back against them. Theodosius's army seized the opportunity, charged, and completely overwhelmed their blinded and demoralized enemy. Eugenius was captured and executed. For Theodosius and his Christian supporters, the cause of the wind was obvious. It was the hand of God, a divine intervention that confirmed his vision and blessed his cause. This victory was the final nail in the coffin for institutional, state-sponsored paganism in the Roman Empire. After the battle, Theodosius enacted further laws against pagan practices, and Christianity became not just the favored religion, but the official state religion. The vision of the cross, first seen by Constantine as a promise, was renewed in Theodosius as a final confirmation. It sealed the deal, ensuring that the future of the Roman Empire, and by extension, the future of Western civilization, would be inextricably linked with the Christian faith. Theodosius's victory, divinely sanctioned in his eyes, wasn't just the end of a civil war. It was the dawn of Christendom. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to the final days of Roman paganism. The stories of Constantine and Theodosius show how faith and power can intertwine to change the course of history forever. If you found this fascinating, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the pivotal moments of the past. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Hello, history lovers, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're journeying back to the twilight years of one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. We're talking about Rome, but not the Rome of Caesar or Augustus. Instead, we're focusing on a figure who stands at a monumental crossroads in history. Theodosius I, the last emperor to rule a fully united Roman Empire. His story isn't just about battles and politics. It's a poignant tale of holding together a world that was beginning to fracture forever. To truly grasp the significance of Theodosius, we need to understand the state of the Roman Empire in the late 4th century. For nearly a century, since the time of Diocletian, the empire had often been split between an Eastern and a Western emperor. This was a practical solution to manage its vast, unwieldy territory. It wasn't a formal divorce, more like a long-distance marriage with two households. There was still the idea of a single, unified asterisk, res publica, Romana, asterisk, the Roman state. But the cracks were showing. Economic disparities, cultural shifts with Greek becoming more dominant in the East and Latin in the West End. Constant external pressures were pulling the two halves apart. This was the world Theodosius was born into in 347 AD, in what is now Spain. His rise to power was forged in crisis. In 378, the Eastern Roman army suffered a catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Adrianople against the Goths. It was a disaster on par with Cannae or Teutoburg Forest. The Eastern Emperor Valens was killed, and the Balkan provinces were left wide open to devastation. The Western Emperor, Gratian, was in a desperate situation. He needed a brilliant military commander, someone with a steady hand and an iron will. He turned to Theodosius, the son of a respected general, and in 379 appointed him Emperor of the East. Theodosius didn't inherit a throne in a time of peace. He was handed a crown of fire. His immediate task was the Gothic problem. The Goths were now inside the empire's borders, a powerful, cohesive force that couldn't simply be pushed out. Outright military victory was impossible after the losses at Adrianople. So, Theodosius did something controversial but pragmatic. Instead of fighting an endless war, and negotiated. In 382, he signed a treaty that allowed the Goths to settle within the empire as autonomous allies, or asterisk foederati. Asterisk, they would live under their own leaders but were obligated to fight for Rome when called upon. This was a landmark decision. It was a departure from traditional Roman policy and essentially created a barbarian nation within the state. Some saw it as a sign of weakness, a dangerous precedent. Others saw it as a necessary compromise, a way to turn a formidable enemy into a much-needed source of military manpower. This policy would shape the Western Empire's fate for the next century. But Theodosius wasn't just a military strategist. He was a deeply religious man, and his reign would permanently change the spiritual landscape of the Roman world. Up to this point, Christianity was the favored religion, but traditional Roman paganism still had a strong and influential following, especially among the old senatorial elite in Rome. Theodosius, a devout Nicene Christian, decided to end this ambiguity. In 380, with the Edict of Thessalonica, he made Nicene Christianity the official state religion of the Roman Empire. This wasn't just a declaration of personal faith, it was law. All other Christian creeds were branded as heretical, and over the course of his reign, pagan practices came under increasing attack. Temples were closed, eternal flames, like the one tended by the Vestal Virgins in Rome, were extinguished, and the Olympic Games, a tradition stretching back over 1,000 years, were held for the last time in 393. Theodosius effectively dismantled the religious framework that had supported the Roman state for centuries, replacing it with the new Christian foundation. It was a revolution from the top down, the final step in Rome's transformation from a pagan to a Christian empire. One of the most dramatic events of his reign shows the shifting balance of power between the emperor and the church. In 390, after a riot in Thessalonica resulted in the death of a Roman general, Theodosius ordered a brutal retaliation. Thousands of citizens were massacred in the city's hippodrome. The backlash was immediate, not from a rival general, but from Ambrose, the formidable bishop of Milan. Ambrose excommunicated the emperor, barring him from church services. Think about that for a moment. A bishop, a spiritual leader, publicly defied and punished the most powerful man in the world. For several months, Theodosius held out, but the political and spiritual pressure was immense. Finally, he relented. He performed public penance, stripping off his imperial robes and begging for forgiveness in the Cathedral of Milan. This was a moment of unprecedented historical significance. It demonstrated that even the Roman emperor was subject to the authority of the Church. The old idea of the emperor as a godlike figure, the Pontifex Maximus asterisk, was truly dead. A new power dynamic was born, one that would define European politics for the next 1,000 years. Now, let's get to the moment that defines his legacy. Throughout his reign, Theodosius had to contend with usurpers and instability in the Western Empire. In 394, he marched west to confront a pagan-backed usurper named Eugene. At the frigid battle of the frigid ice river, Theodosius, with a large contingent of his Gothic foederati, secured a hard-won victory. With this triumph, he was now the sole, undisputed master of the entire Roman world. From the shores of Scotland to the sands of Mesopotamia, for the first time in years, one man held the scepter of both East and West. The dream of a united Rome was, for a fleeting moment, a reality once more. This was the autumn of 394 AD. The empire was whole, but this unity was tragically brief. Theodosius was already in declining health. He enjoyed his state as a sole emperor for just a few months. In January 395, in Milan, he passed away. His final act was to follow the established tradition and divide the empire between his two young sons. His 10-year-old son, Honorius, would rule the west, and his 17-year-old son, Arcadius, would rule the east. This time, however, the split was different. It was permanent. The two halves would never again be united under a single Roman ruler. The courts of Ravenna and Constantinople drifted apart, pursuing their own interests, often becoming rivals. The Western Empire would crumble within a generation, while the Eastern Empire would evolve into what we now call the Byzantine Empire, lasting for another 1,000 years. So, why do we remember Theodosius as the Great? It's a complex title. He was a capable general who stabilized the East after a devastating crisis. His treaty with the Goths, while controversial, was a pragmatic solution to an impossible problem. Most significantly, he cemented Christianity's place as the bedrock of the Roman state and, by extension, Western civilization. But his true symbolic power lies in his title as the last. He stands at the end of an era when the idea of a single, unified Roman world was still alive. After him, that idea became a memory, a lost golden age to be yearned for by future leaders like Charlemagne. Theodosius wasn't the emperor who lost the empire. He was the last one to hold it all. His reign was the final, deep breath of a united Roman world before its final, irrevocable division. He is a testament to the fact that even the most powerful institutions can fracture and that history often pivots on the shoulders of single, crucial figures. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the figures who shaped our world. Let us know in the comments what you think about Theodosius's legacy. Was he a great unifier or an agent of division? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through the annals of history. Today, we arrive at a pivotal, yet somber moment. The year 395 CE, we find ourselves in Milan, a city that had become a de facto capital of the Western Roman Empire. Here, in the imperial palace, one of the last great emperors of a unified Rome, Theodosius the Great, is drawing his final breaths. There are no grand battles, no dramatic last stands on the field of war. Instead, it is a quiet, almost anticlimactic end to a reign that had been anything but. Theodosius's life was a whirlwind of military campaigns, political intrigue, and profound religious transformation. He had fought usurpers, pacified the Goths, and most significantly, made Nicene Christianity the state religion of the Roman Empire, forever changing the spiritual landscape of the Western world. He was a man of immense power, deep faith, and sometimes a fearsome temper, as the infamous massacre of Thessalonica attested. But now, all that energy, all that authority, was fading. Disease had taken hold, a condition we now believe was likely dropsy, causing severe swelling and weakness. The man who had commanded legions and dictated the faith of millions was now confined to his bed, his body failing him. By his side were not legions of soldiers, but a few trusted advisors and, most importantly, his two sons, the 18-year-old Arcadius and the 10-year-old Honorius. Imagine the scene. A father, knowing his end is near, looks upon his children, who are not just heirs to his property, but to the largest, most complex empire the world had ever known. He had groomed them for this moment, bestowing upon them the title of Augustus years earlier. But were they ready? This must have been the question weighing heavily on Theodosius's mind. Arcadius, destined for the East, was known to be a bit passive, easily influenced by the strong personalities in his court. Honorius, the future ruler of the West, was just a boy, a child about to be handed a world of responsibility. The formal division of the empire was not a new concept. For decades, Rome had been governed by co-emperors, one in the East and one in the West, as a practical measure to manage its vast territories. Diocletian's tetrarchy had been the most famous attempt at this. However, under Theodosius, the empire had been, for a brief period, reunified under a single, powerful ruler. His death marked the final, definitive split. It wasn't a hostile act or a civil war that tore the empire apart. It was a father's will, an inheritance. He was bequeathing the East, with its vibrant capital of Constantinople, to Arcadius, and the West, with its symbolic heart in Rome, but its administrative center. Shifting, on January 17th, 395 CE, Theodosius the Great passed away. The great bishop of Milan, Ambrose, who had once famously stood up to the emperor and forced him to do public penance, now delivered a powerful funeral oration. He praised Theodosius not just as a conqueror, but as a man of faith, a princeps Christianissimus, a most Christian emperor. Ambrose emphasized Theodosius's humility in the face of God, cementing the image of a ruler who, for all his earthly power, ultimately submitted to a higher authority. This was the legacy that would truly endure. In the immediate aftermath, the empire carried on, now under two separate administrations. The line was drawn, running through the Balkans. To the east, the Greek-speaking, economically robust world of to the west, the Latin-speaking, increasingly beleaguered world of Hun. While in theory they were still two halves of one whole, in practice, their paths began to diverge almost immediately. They would develop their own distinct political cultures, face different external threats, and ultimately meet very different fates. The court of Arcadius in Constantinople was a nest of intrigue, dominated by powerful eunuchs and ambitious praetorian prefects. Arcadius himself remained a figurehead, while the real power was wielded by men like Rufinus and later The Eastern Empire, however, possessed stronger cities, a more vibrant economy, and more defensible borders. It had the resilience to weather the storms that were gathering on the horizon. In the West, the situation was far more precarious. The young Honorius was under the regency of the brilliant Vandal general, Stilicho. Stilicho was a master strategist and a loyal servant of the empire, and for over a decade, he skillfully defended the western frontiers against wave after wave of barbarian incursions. He fought the Goths, the Vandals, and the Alans, holding the fragile state together through sheer force of will and military genius. But his position was always tenuous. As a Vandal, he was viewed with suspicion by the Roman aristocracy, and his enemies at court constantly plotted against him. This final division in 395 CE is often seen as the beginning of the end for the Western Roman Empire. With its own separate court, army, and bureaucracy, the West could no longer easily draw upon the vast resources, wealth, and manpower of the East. When crisis hit, it had to fend for itself. And crisis was coming. The pressures on the Rhine and Danube frontiers were becoming unbearable. Entire peoples were on the move, pushed westward by forces originating deep in the Eurasian steppes. While the political and military unity of the empire was broken, Theodosius's spiritual legacy flourished. The state-sponsored Christianity he had championed became the defining characteristic of the successor states. The Church, with its bishops, its councils, and its increasingly codified doctrine provided a new kind of unity. It was a cultural and religious glue that would hold Europe together even as the political structure of Rome crumbled. The very idea of Christendom, a unified Christian world, was born from the policies that Theodosius had put in place. So, as we look back on that quiet room in Milan in 395, we see more than just the death of one man. We witnessed the end of an era. It was the last time a single emperor would rule over the entire Roman world, from the misty shores of Britain to the deserts of Syria. It was the formal beginning of the two entities that would become the Byzantine Empire in the East and the fragmented kingdoms of the medieval West. Theodosius's death wasn't a violent cataclysm, but a quiet, administrative act of inheritance that set in motion the final, irreversible divergence of the Roman world. His sons inherited an empire, but history would inherit a new map and a new faith. The body of the empire was divided, but its soul, now Christian, would march on, shaping the future in ways Theodosius himself could have barely imagined. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of a truly pivotal moment in history. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We have so many more stories to tell. Until next time, stay curious. Hello, history enthusiasts, and welcome back to our channel. We've journeyed with Constantine through battles, visions, and political reforms. But now, we arrive at the most crucial part of his story, his legacy. How did one man's decisions, made over 1700 years ago, sculpt the world we know today? How did he lay the foundations for not one, but multiple empires and a global religion? This is the story of how Constantine's Christian empire didn't just end with him but echoed through centuries, creating the very bedrock of Christian Europe. To truly understand Constantine's impact, we have to start with the city he built, Constantinople. It wasn't just a new capital, it was a new Rome. Why was this so significant? By moving the heart of the Roman Empire eastward, he wasn't abandoning Rome, he was strategically repositioning it. T's new city, situated at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, was a fortress, a commercial hub, and a Christian metropolis, all in one. Unlike old Rome, steeped in centuries of pagan tradition, Constantinople was built from the ground up as a Christian capital. Churches, not pagan temples, dominated its skyline. This physical shift represented a monumental ideological shift. The empire's identity was no longer just Roman. It was now inextricably Roman and Christian. This new Rome would outlive the Western Roman Empire by 1,000 years, becoming the heart of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines saw themselves not as successors to the Romans, but as the Romans themselves, continuing the legacy Constantine had established. The legal codes, the administrative structures, the fusion of imperial power and Christian faith, all of it was a direct inheritance from him. The Hagia Sophia, one of the most magnificent structures ever built, was a testament to this union of imperial wealth and Christian devotion. So, when we talk about Byzantium, with its golden mosaics, its powerful empire, and its Orthodox faith, we are talking about the first and most direct branch of Constantine's legacy. He didn't just move a capital, he planted a seed that would grow into one of history's most enduring empires. But what about old Rome? What happened to the city left behind? This is where the story gets even more interesting. As imperial authority waned in the West, a new power began to rise in its place. The Bishop of Rome, or as we know him, the Pope. Constantine had not only legalized Christianity, but had also showered the church with land, wealth, and legal privileges. He gave the Bishop of Rome the Lateran Palace, effectively establishing a seat of power. This patronage was crucial. With the Western Emperor gone, the Pope became one of the most stable and influential figures in Italy. He took on civic duties, organized defenses, and negotiated with barbarian leaders. People looked to the church for structure and guidance in a world of chaos. This growing influence was bolstered by the idea of apostolic succession, the belief that the Pope was the direct successor to St. Peter, to whom Jesus had entrusted the keys to the kingdom. While the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople held political sway, the Pope in Rome began to claim a higher, spiritual authority over all of Christendom. This set the stage for a major division, the Great Schism between the Catholic West and the Orthodox East, but it also cemented the Pope's role as a major political player in Europe. So, ironically, by creating a new Rome in the East, Constantine inadvertently created the conditions for the rise of a powerful, independent papacy in the West. This dual legacy, a Christian emperor in Constantinople and a powerful pope in Rome, would define the next millennium of European history. Now, let's fast forward a few centuries to the year 800. On Christmas Day, a powerful Germanic king named Charlemagne kneels in prayer in Rome. In a moment that would change history, Pope Leo III places a crown on his head and declares him Emperor of the Romans. This was the birth of the Holy Roman Empire. But what does this have to do with Constantine? Everything. The very idea of a Christian Roman emperor in the West was a concept borrowed directly from Constantine. Charlemagne and his successors saw themselves as renewing the Western Roman Empire. But this time, its legitimacy came not just from military might, but from the blessing of the Pope. The name itself, Holy Roman Empire, tells you everything. Holy signifies its Christian foundation, a direct inheritance from Constantine's conversion. Roman signals its claim to the legacy of ancient Rome. Empire declares its ambition to unite Europe under a single Christian ruler. This was a powerful political and religious ideology, a three-way partnership between the emperor, the pope, and the ghost of Constantine. For centuries, this empire would be the dominant political force in Central Europe, shaping the destiny of Germany, Italy, and beyond. Its existence was a constant dialogue with the past, an attempt to recreate the unity and God-given authority of Constantine's original Christian empire. So, let's connect the dots. In the East, Constantine's legacy lived on in the Byzantine Empire, a direct continuation of his Christianized Roman state. In the West, his patronage of the Church allowed the papacy to grow into a formidable spiritual and temporal power, and this papal power, in turn, created a new Holy Roman Empire in the West, an attempt to resurrect Constantine's imperial model. Byzantium, the Catholic Church, and the Holy Roman Empire, three pillars of the medieval world, all tracing their origins back to the decisions of one man. His vision of a unified Christian state, or Christendom, became the driving political and cultural ideal of the Middle Ages. This is why Constantine is such a pivotal figure. He stands at the watershed of history, with one foot in the classical world of the Caesars and the other in the medieval world of popes and Christian kings. His conversion wasn't just a personal choice. It was an event that re-engineered the DNA of Western civilization. He fused Roman statecraft with Christian faith, and the resulting synthesis gave birth to the world of the Middle Ages. The very concept of Europe as a distinct Christian-identified continent is, in many ways, a product of his reign. The conflicts between popes and emperors, the Crusades, the magnificent cathedrals, the flourishing of monasticism, all of it unfolded within the framework he helped create. Constantine's legacy is a testament to the power of a single individual to redirect the river of history. His choices created new centers of power, new political ideologies, and a new identity for an entire continent. He didn't just foresee a Christian future, he actively built it. The dawn of Christian Europe was not an accident of history. It was, in large part, a project initiated by its first Christian emperor. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the life and legacy of Constantine the Great. His story is a powerful reminder of how the past never truly leaves us. If you found this series insightful, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next historical deep dive. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. As we stand amidst these silent ruins, where the grandeur of an empire once echoed, we are met with a profound quiet. The wind whispers through the hollows of what were once bustling, carrying tales of triumphs and tragedies, of emperors and subjects, of a world that has long since passed into memory. Here, in the dust and decay, it's easy to see only an end. The fall of Rome, the crumbling of stone, the inevitable march of time that lays all worldly power to waste. But is that the whole story? Look closer, beyond the fallen columns and the weathered mosaics. something else remains. It's not something you can touch or hold, but it's as real as the stones beneath our feet. It's an idea. A belief, a flicker of light that was kindled in an age of upheaval and uncertainty. When we think of the great emperors, we often think of conquerors and builders, men who expanded borders and erected monuments to their own glory. We measure their success in territory gained and enemies vanquished, and by those measures, every empire is destined to fail. Borders shrink, monuments crumble, and glory fades into the stuff of legends. But there's another kind of power at play in the final centuries of Rome. A power not of the sword, but of the spirit. A power that wasn't concerned with the ephemeral boundaries of nations, but with the eternal landscape of the human soul. It was a revolution of the heart, one that would outlast the very civilization that gave it birth. Theodosius the Great, the last emperor to rule over a united Roman Empire, made a decision that would ripple through the ages. In a world teetering on the brink of collapse, he chose to champion a faith. It may have seemed like a political move, a desperate attempt to unify a fragmenting realm under a single banner. Perhaps it was. But it was also something more. He didn't build the grandest aqueducts or the most imposing forums. His legacy isn't etched into the largest triumphal arches. Instead, he did something far more enduring. He took a fledgling flame of belief, shielded it from the gathering winds of chaos, and gave it the sanction of the most powerful empire on earth. Theodosius lit a flame that never went out. As the Western Empire dissolved, as legions were recalled and barbarians stormed the gates, that flame did not die. It was carried forth. It passed from the hands of emperors to the hands of bishops, from the marble halls of Rome to the quiet cloisters of remote monasteries. While the infrastructure of the empire collapsed, a new network was being woven, one of faith and scholarship. Monks in windswept Irish isles, far from the sun-drenched heart of the old empire, painstakingly copied manuscripts, preserving not just sacred texts, but the philosophy, literature, and history of a world that was disappearing. They were keepers of the light. In the darkest of the Dark Ages, these small, scattered communities were like candles in the ruins, guarding the accumulated wisdom of generations. The faith that Theodosius had established as the state religion of Rome became the bedrock of a new civilization. It shaped the laws, the art, the music, and the very worldview of the successor kingdoms that rose from Rome's ashes. The language of the Church, Latin, became the language of learning, uniting scholars across a divided continent. The moral framework of the faith provided a sense of order and shared identity in a world that had lost its political center. Centuries passed. New empires rose and fell. The Renaissance looked back to the classical world that Rome had embodied, but it did so through the lens of the faith that had preserved its memory. The age of exploration carried that same faith across vast oceans to new continents, for better and for worse, intertwining its destiny with the story of the entire globe. The scientific revolution challenged its doctrines. The Enlightenment questioned its authority, yet the flame continued to burn. It adapted, it evolved, it fractured into 1,000 different expressions, but it was never extinguished. It has inspired acts of incredible charity and acts of unspeakable cruelty. It has built hospitals and universities, and it has fueled wars and persecution. It is a legacy as complex and contradictory as humanity itself. And that brings us back here, to these ruins. They're a testament to the fact that nothing built by human hands lasts forever. Power, wealth, military might, all turns to dust. The Caesars are gone. The legions are gone. The empire is a ghost, a memory. But the light kindled in its dying days flickers on. It burns in cathedrals that scrape the skies, and in humble chapels in forgotten villages. It burns in the philosophical debates of theologians and in the quiet, personal prayer of a solitary believer. It is embedded in our calendars, our holidays, our laws, and the very words we speak. The story of Theodosius and the fall of Rome is not just a story about an end. It's a story about a transition. It teaches us that the most powerful legacies are not made of stone and mortar, but of ideas and beliefs. It reminds us that what truly endures is what we pass on, the stories we tell, the values we cherish, the faith we hold. The wind continues its song through the broken arches, a mournful sound for all that has been lost. But if you listen closely, You can also hear a note of persistence, a note of ope. It's the echo of a conviction that even when the greatest of civilizations fall, something essential can survive. A single, well-tended flame can outshine the darkness of a fallen world, carrying the light of the past into an unknown future. The empire is dead, but the candle still burns. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If these stories of the past inspire you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more explorations into the legacies that shape our world. We are grateful for your time and your curiosity. Until next time.